Thank you for being here. My name is Jan Gonzalez. I'm a community education specialist working on the Goldspotted Oak Borer Education and Outreach Program with the University of California Cooperative Extension. I'm based in San Diego County, but I have worked on this program regionally throughout Southern California. And we really do appreciate you being here today. We have got a packed agenda. There is a slightly updated schedule, and it is, or schedule lineup rather, and I did put a link to that in the chat. Okay, without further ado, we're going to get started. Our first speaker is Kim Corella. She's a pathologist with CALFIRE, and we were just chatting. We've been involved, she's been involved with the Gold-Spotted Oak Borer issue since its beginning of discovery here in San Diego County, and she's going to get us kicked off today. So Kim, go ahead and share.
So good morning. Thank you guys for joining. And I'm going to go over Goldspotted Oak Borer biology to get you guys set up for the rest of the symposium today. All right, so the Goldspotted Oak Borer is a flat-headed borer. It's Agralis aurogutatus is the Latin name, and it attacks a number of red oak species. And I'll talk about the ones in California in a little bit. It is an aggressive insect, which does attack healthy trees. It's the only insect in California that attacks healthy oaks, and that's a wood borer. Historically, it was found in Southeast Arizona, southern Mexico, northern Guatemala in the 1800s. The species in southern Mexico and northern Guatemala are a different species. The one we have here is from Southeast Arizona. It was found originally during an exotic wood borer survey in 2004, but really wasn't associated with the dieback we were seeing of oaks in Southern California in 2008 when Tom Coleman was hired by the Forest Service and made that connection. Since then, GSOB has killed approximately 200,000 oak trees, probably more than that, but that's what we've been able to piece together through the literature and reports that we have. And it was probably introduced into San Diego County probably in the late 1990s, and was cause for that mortality around the 2000s that we were seeing in Southern California. So this is the distribution of GSOB. As I mentioned earlier, the southern, the Guatemala and Mexico species are different species, and the one from Arizona is the one that was introduced into California. And we're not exactly sure how it got here, but most likely it was moved by firewood since there's no continuous host. The pink and the different colors are the distribution of oak species. So as you can see from Southeast Arizona to San Diego, there's not a continuous host. So it's most likely brought in here by firewood. And I'll get into that in a little bit later. Currently, GSOB is in 6 counties now. It's in San Diego, where it was originally found, and then it's in Riverside, San Bernardino, Orange, Los Angeles, and Ventura County. So GSOB causes a lot of mortality once it's been in an area for a long period of time. This is San Diego County, so it's been here, so as I mentioned, since the late 1990s. So when you have high infestation rates, the mortality is going to be high. So here it's about 50% mortality rate, and 90% of those trees are infested on those large diameter trees. If you have new infestations, obviously it takes a while for the mortality to increase. So it takes 3 to 5 years or so for these trees to die from GSOB. But you can see this definitely changes the structure of the forest. There's another picture in San Diego County just showing what the impacts are of this insect. The picture on the left was a campground and a trailhead, and you see the dead and dying trees there, the oaks. And then the picture on the right is like a ravine, like a stream area that all the mature oaks have died from GSOB. So it definitely has a huge impact on riparian species, wildlife, and numerous other impacts. So the life cycle of this guy, it's a 1-year life cycle, and we'll start with the adult on the bottom here. So the adult emerges around May, in April, May, And then the peak emergence is late June, early July, and that'll go through September, October, maybe even into November, depending on what the temperature is, what the weather is. And then when they emerge from the tree, they make this little pupal case right here, and they're right at the bark. So when they chew out, they make that D-shaped exit hole, got the shape of their body, because they're the flat back and they have the big belly. So you'll see the D-shaped exit hole. So the exit hole is their belly, and the flat part is the flat of their back. And then when they feed on, when they leave, they feed on the leaves and the top of the canopy, and they need to feed on there for about 10 days or so to become sexually mature. And then they mate, and then the female will lay their eggs on the bark and bark crevices around the tree. They can lay over a few hundred eggs, 200 to 300 eggs, but they don't lay them all in one spot. They lay them in little clusters, like two legs here, 3 legs here, and they're right in those bark crevices. That way, the larvae, when they exit, they can bore through the bark really easily. Because everybody knows that the bark of oaks is really, really thick. So, and these larvae are super tiny. So they want to have the best chance of getting into that bark. So if you lay them in the crevices, it's easier to chew through that area. So once the larvae do bore into the bark and the phloem of the tree, they feed extensively underneath there throughout the summer. And they feed at that cambium-xylem interface, and that's that picture in the top middle here. And all these black squiggly lines are the larvae galleries that this larvae make as they're feeding. They just feed around randomly and make these meandering galleries. A lot of other insects, you can tell what they are by the shape of the galleries. Bark beetles have really distinct galleries. And GSOB, it looks like you just threw spaghetti at it. It's just thrown on there and just kind of meandering. And then after the end of the summer, GSOB larvae will bore back out in the outer part of the bark to make that pupal case. So when the adult emerges, like I showed in the beginning, it doesn't have much to chew through, and it folds back on itself and makes this hairpin pupa, pre-pupa we called it. And it'll be there until it'll start transforming into an adult from October to when the insect emerges. So here's some more life cycles. Here's a pre-pupa and the pupa, and then here's an adult that's not sclerotized yet, a 10-year-old adult, and then it becomes an adult and completes that life cycle. So this whole life cycle is 1 year long. Here's just another picture of that life cycle if people like to see it graphically. So here's the adult when it emerges, eggs, larval feeding, and that whole life cycle here. And this is the little larvae that emerges right here on the left here in the picture of the mature larvae. You can see how tiny that is. So you really want that eggs in those bark crevices so it can actually get into the tree. So this insect attacks coast live oak and California black oak. Those are the most susceptible species in California. It has been found and does attack canyon live oak, but that is least susceptible. It really prefers the coast live oak and California black oak. On the right here is a distribution map of these 3 species, and they dominate about 15 million hectares in California. So this insect has the potential to spread throughout California, and it's not hindered by temperature. It's been found at 6,000 feet, and it's been found at sea level. So the weather, it may be limited in Northern California, but probably not. So what do symptoms look like when a GSOB tree has been attacked? They really like large diameter trees, so around 18 and 20 inches. Here's a coast live oak that's 18 inches in DBH. And right now this tree is attacked, but you can't really tell because the crown looks green. It's really healthy, but there is some staining on the tree, but it's really hard to tell in this picture. But looking at this tree, you really wouldn't see that anything is wrong with it. But as that insect girdles that tree and feeds, it's girdling that cambium, right? Because in that cambium-xylem interface, So it's restricting that movement of water in that tree. So as it does that over generations, after 3 or 4 years, that canopy would die back because it's not getting water. So you'll start seeing a thin canopy throughout the entire tree, twigs dying back, smaller leaves, and that's a good indicator that something is wrong with your tree. It may not necessarily be GSOB, but when you see something like that, you know that something is going on with your tree. So it requires some further investigation. And as that insect continues to feed on those trees, on that tree, it'll eventually die, and you'll see the leaves fall off, and just a typical dead-looking tree. Also, with coast live oak, they can die really fairly quickly in the summertime, and those leaves can remain on the tree because the insect is cutting off that water supply, so the tree isn't going through the natural process of making that, and coast live oak don't throw their leaves off anyways. They're not deciduous, but they'll hang on to those leaves. So they'll die and they'll hang on to those dead leaves. So if you see dead leaves on a tree, coast live oak tree, then that's really important too, that something's going on with that tree. And that's a good indicator that it may be GSOB, if you're in a GSOB area. For California black oak, as I mentioned, they like large diameter trees. They like about 20 inches in California black oak, but they will attack trees to a DBH of about 8 inches DBH, so that's pretty small. But with California black oak, it's pretty similar to the symptoms you'll see with coast live oak. You'll see twig dieback, as the picture on the left, smaller leaves being attached, being produced each year, and then again the leaves hanging on. With black oak, they don't, because the tree is killed usually in the summer. The tree's natural process of forming that abscission layer isn't formed yet, so the leaves are held on. So that's a good indicator as well with the coast live oak that something is going on with that black oak. So crown symptoms are one indicator that it could potentially be GSOB, that thinning, smaller leaves, twig dieback. And then other evidence is staining. So as that insect feeds in that cambium interface, the tree is still conducting water on the other parts of the tree, and that water just leaks over into that dead area, and you'll have a staining, and that pressure builds up and it can push out through the bark. So you'll have staining. Again, it's a lot of things can cause staining, so it's not necessarily GSOB, but it could potentially be GSOB. And you'll see the staining on the lower bowl of the tree. GSOB attacks the lower bowl of the tree about 10 feet and down. So it makes it really easy to survey. And as the tree becomes more and more heavily infested, it can attack those large scaffolding branches. Not in the same degree as the lower trunk, but it can have some attacks in the larger scaffolding branches, anything above 8 inches. And you can kind of see maybe here some staining where these yellow arrows are. So this is another picture of those galleries. See how they're meandering around. The one on the right, see how wet that is. And I chopped into this bark, and there's a lot of fluid built up here. And then there's a GSOB larvae right here in the hairpin formation, starting that transformation to become a prepupa and a pupa in an adult. You can see how close it is to that outer bark. So the GSOB is in the bark, it's not in the wood. This just shows the impact that the girdling has on the tree. All these little black areas here on this cross section show that the cambium is disrupted and the tree is no longer uptaking water. So it has a huge impact over time of having this tree not allowing to take up water. So just some pictures here of GSOB in some different stages, but I just want to highlight here that's out the edge of the bark here. So it's right underneath that bark, like a 1/4 inch. So here's that hairpin formation. You can kind of see the pupil structure right here, pupil case. And here's an adult that's not sclerotized yet, but you can see how close it is. And then you can see this little black D-shaped area here. That's where it's developing. And then when it does become sclerotized, it chews out, have these characteristic D-shaped exit holes. So here's what they look like on black oak, and here's what they look like on coast live oak. And they're small, they're not as big as most people think. They're 3 millimeters, so it's about the same size as the lettering on a quarter. So you take the B here, it's about the same size as that, but it's a D shape. So you have the symptoms we're looking for are the thinning, the staining on the trees, crown thinning, staining, D-shaped exit holes. These all indicate GSOB. And if you see the D-shaped exit holes on the trunk of the tree in a otherwise healthy tree, then that's clear indicator that you most likely have GSOB. The insect holes can be confused with other ones. I'll get into that a little bit later, but that's an indicator that you do have GSOB if they're the right size and on a coast live oak or California black oak. So some trees are attacked more than others. You might see a couple of trees that have just a few exit holes and some trees that are really heavily attacked. These are called brood trees. These pictures here, all these cocktail toothpicks are D-shaped exit holes from where GSOB emerged. So they really like some of these trees. And when you have one of these trees, they contain about 60 to 95% of the GSOB insect population. So this is a good strategy in management. And these trees really only account for about 7% of the trees that are infested. So if you find one, that is, if you remove these, it's a good management tool to reduce that population load in that area. And really a lot of beetles can be produced on these amplifier trees. And remember, they're in the bark, right? They're not in the wood. So they were removing a tree in Idlewild. We took some bark samples, about 3 feet in diameter here. Kevin Turner and Tom Scott put them in this barrel to see how many would emerge. And they put them in this little container and they could emerge from here. And there's probably about 200 in GSOB that emerged from that barrel, just from that little bit of wood. So those amplifier trees are really heavily infested, and you can see all the beetles that could be destroyed if those amplifier trees are removed. Another sign of possibly something's going on with your tree is woodpecker feeding. Woodpeckers are notoriously, they're looking for insects constantly, and when the GSOB larvae are in those hairpin formation and becoming an adult, they're right underneath the bark, right? So they're flicking off that bark and just eating those grubs. It's like a buffet. They're delicious. I haven't tried them, but the birds really like them, so they'll see some woodpecker feeding. But this just means that there's something going on with this tree. You'll see the bark beetles as well on pines. So it's not an indicator that you have GSOB, but it's something to hone in on, that something's tree stressed. There's obviously insects in there, so it's something to check out. But you really want to look for those D-shaped exit holes. And I mentioned earlier that if you see a D-shaped exit hole, it should be GSOB, but as you can see here, there's a lot of exit holes that can be similar. So you want to be certain that it's D-shaped and that it's from GSOB. There's some ones that are round, about the same size. You can have other D-shaped ones that are larger. So you want to get the size right. So they can be confusing. So you want to make sure you get the eye for it, hone in on those other symptoms that I talked about. And then if you are able to look underneath the bark of the tree with permission and see those larvae, then you're 100% sure. But they can be confusing until you get the eye for these exit holes. GSOB really naturally doesn't spread very fast. The adult's maximum flight, if they want to fly, is about a mile, but usually they just fly to the next tree. They're not gonna go too far for food. There's a lot of trees nearby, so they're not gonna fly a mile, but they technically could, but they'll just fly to the next tree or attack the same tree. But really, the spread that we've been seeing in California and how it originally got here, that we suspect, is by firewood, because GSOB lives in that bark, right? So transporting oak firewood is really useful. People use it for home heating, barbecues. It's used a lot. So that's one of the ways that this insect has been spread throughout California, unfortunately. So We found firewood when we first started looking at this in San Diego County, a truckload of firewood that was on the side of the road. When Tom Coleman was still here, he looked at it and it was infested with GSOB. He was going to talk to the guy the next day. When he went back there, that semi truck full of oak firewood that was infested was gone. So these been reports of these firewood movement up to the Sierras, all over Yosemite. So movement of firewood is really a huge problem. And people most likely don't know it's infested with GSOB, so I'm not blaming them, but just got to be careful of moving fire. We tell people not to move it. So there's new infestations. GSOB is moving around, as I mentioned, through firewood. So here's some new infestations in LA, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Ventura. Ventura County is a new infested county. So here's that tree in Ventura County. We suspect it was moved there by firewood. This is confirmed by the D-shaped exit hole and the larvae. Here's a location of the new trees in the tree infested in Riverside. And again, just this distribution of GSOB. And I just want to show this quick that back in 2015, there's a paper that showed the natural risk map of natural flight only at GSOB. So you can see the red dots, the red stars are where GSOB is currently found. So it lines up with where this insect has potential to spread. Obviously, these were moved a lot by firewood into these new locations, but the potential to spread is throughout California. That red area, red and orange area are where the habitat is conducive for GSOB to spread. So there's more information on GSOB, gsob.org, and there's a Cal Invasive website for the updated distribution map of GSOB. And that's it.
Thank you, Kim. It's always great to get that really thorough overview of this pest. All right. Next up, we have Dr. Bea Nobua, or Beatriz Nobua Behrman. We call her Bea for short. She's going to share with us. She's with the UC Cooperative Extension in Urban Forestry and Natural Resources Advisor in LA and Orange County, based out of Orange County. She's going to talk to us about best management practices for Gold-Spotted Oak Borer. Bea, please take it away.
Thank you, Jan. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. And let's dive into so we don't waste too much time. So when we start talking, why is this? There we go. We start talking about doing pest management practices. We always talk about using an integrated pest management framework. And then this slide, what I want to show you is a new way of thinking about integrated pest management. And it's not just, doing the pest management, which I hope you can see my cursor. So you have the pest management here in green, but also, having some planning and organization on how are you going to be monitoring this pest, what actions are you going to take, using all your resources and knowledge. That's very classic of IPM. So everything that Kim was telling us about the biology of this species, one we know, tricky biologists use that against their pests. It's like, oh, so you have one life, like you take 1 year to do your life cycle. So there's one moment where you are more susceptible to this kind of management, or you have brood trees or amplifier trees, so we can do something about that. So we use what we know to inform our IPM practice. But also something super important to keep is this other bubble, the communication bubble. I think is very, very important when we are approaching a management plan to keep communication going. And it means many things. It means communication with other people that are managing the same pest. So knowing what the land managers, our neighbors are doing, having a communication between agencies and landowners. So, if my tree is here, but your tree is infested and we have to go through this other property to go, do any kind of management practices, we need to have these agencies talking to each other and knowing what each other, knowing each other and knowing who to talk to so we can have timely action, right? It's not the moment where we find a brood tree, an amplifier tree, it's not the moment to start saying like, oh, who is in like a transportation authority in this area? No, you have to have communication between agencies before that, ideally. So when you have to take action, you can take action right away. But the other communication, it's communication with the public, because you'll see when you start managing GSOB infestations, there's going to be tree removals, there might be treatments, there might be like trees dying, and people are concerned, and rightly so, right? Like oaks are very beloved, and it's really devastating to see the oak in front of your house dying, and so or being removed, those oaks in your block. So people will have lots of questions and will be concerned. So it's really important to keep our public in the know, engaged, and know, okay, this is why we're taking the actions that we are. Like if we're removing this tree, it's because we want to protect the trees around it. So it's very, very important to communicate with the public and get them engaged and involved in all this management plan and practice that you're doing in your community. So when we are talking about a management plan, we have all of this sort of steps, right? We want to prevent the spread of the infestation, or even prevent getting your trees infested. You have a detection and monitoring step. We're going to be removing the amplifier trees, managing the infested wood to prevent it spread to other locations. We have a component of protection of high value oaks, and then restoration. And in all of these steps, we have to make sure we include education, to our surveyors and the people that are boots in the ground, and to our public, communication between agencies and stakeholders, and make sure you have the community involved and actively involved, so you have a successful management plan. So when we talk about prevention, as Kim said, these beetles don't fly very far. I mean, they don't really have the capacity to go too far. They usually just spread to the nearby trees, but they can move really long distances hitchhiking on wood. So really having community awareness about not moving firewood is super, super important. We have the whole campaign of Buy It Where You Burn It. They do not move firewood task force, the firewood task force. So, but it's something that is never stop. It never stops. When you have an area that is infested with GSOB and oak trees start dying, you have the perfect storm, right? You have huge trees that now are dead. Oak is a great source of firewood, and you have someone who has a dead tree that has to go down and has to get rid of that firewood. What a better way to do it than sell it for cheap. You make a buck and the wood is gone. And then you have that person that's going and finds, oh, that's cheap, I'm gonna take that nice oak wood to my cabins in the mountains, and inadvertently is moving firewood that is infested and has a pest to another area. So really, really important to do very strong outreach programs to stress the importance of not moving firewood, because we were potentially moving pests around. Any kind of outreach, here's some examples of our UC master gardeners having booths at different kinds of events where we stress, okay, these are the pests that we have, and we really stress the messaging of buy where you burn it, or not moving firewood. Once you moving on through prevention, now we have to know if we have it and how much, So really, we want to know if we have GSOB as early as possible, right? We want to be able to implement an early detection rapid response plan. And for that, the first part, the early detection, is super, super important in there. And if you want to be on the lookout, the best way is to involve as many stakeholders as you can. So you want to have the municipalities, the local agencies, the land managers, but also, you know, the people who are doing tree trimming, you know, all the green industry workers, and you want to have the homeowners too, just checking on their trees and the trees in the neighborhood, right? So very important in here is to provide proper training for all of these stakeholders. This symposium is one example of them, but also we'll see in later, you know, presentations throughout the symposium about people, how were they involved in their communities and providing trainings for their communities, for the people in their communities to look at the trees and know how to identify those D-shaped exit holes and, you know what to do when they find them. A good example of you know, great outcomes you can get with just providing some training and having some people that are, you know, willing to do their part. We just did a few months ago a training for SoCal Edison and their contractors. We just spent a few hours going through GSOB and what to do and how to identify it. And just 2 months later, we already had 2 new detections in different areas that we didn't know they had GSOB, right? Because like they go and check on the trees under the power lines, and having a trained workforce helps with the early detection. So all to say, just make sure the crews are trained, the communities are somewhat trained, so we can have this early detection going, and we can take action as soon as possible. So let's say you think you found GSOB, so what do you do, right? If for the people who are new to this. So the first thing you're going to do is document the evidence that you have GSOB. And as Kim said, and you guys did awesome in your poll, the way to know if it's GSOB is those D-shaped exit holes, right? And we want to take pictures of those exit holes, but we just don't want just the picture of the exit hole. We want something for scale. So this is an example of a picture with something for scale. But as you can see, it has a finger for scale, and my finger is not the same size as my partner's finger and my other co-worker's finger, because everyone has different sizes of hands. So that is, you know, not a great reference for scale. You can come back home and guess you can measure your finger and then say my nail is like 1/4 of an inch big or something. But here's a better way. You can put something that is standardized, for example, a coin. Or even better one, you can have something with an actual ruler next to it, right? So this is a not so great, a better way of having a scale, and the best way is having an actual ruler or something like that. So this way, when you document your signs of infestation, we can look at the pictures and very quickly decide this is likely a GSOB infestation or this is most likely not a GSOB infestation. Then, of course, you want to take pictures of the tree just to show the whole tree, the state of the tree. And also, if you're not sure which species the tree is, it really helps to take pictures of the leaves and the trunk, so we can also have an idea of that. Then you're going to be collecting site information, you know, about the tree, the species. You want to know how many exit holes you have in that tree, because that will determine the management practices that you're going to follow. The location, of course, and, you know, date and who you are, so we can just reach out to you again. And then you can, I mean, of course, you know who you are, but it's very important if you're in a team, for example, it's important to know who took the data on that tree. So if you have any follow-up questions, we know who to ask, right? A lot of the times then it's like, oh, this group sent this report, but we don't know within the 20 workers in that group who did it, and so it takes a lot more time. So it's nice to have the surveyor name in when you take records. Once you do that, if you are not sure or you want to have confirmation and it's a new area, a new infested area, you can report that infestation in gsob.org. So if you go to our website, gsob.org, you can use this tool over here that says report suspected GSOB. And if you collected those pictures I told you and that information I told you, you can go ahead and report it. That report goes to us, and mostly Kim. I think she gets the first view of it. And, you know, we look at the pictures. Do we think it's like GSOB or not? And if we suspect that it's GSOB, we'll probably send someone from this collaborative team to go check and you know, double check and confirm if it's GSOB or not. So now if once you know there's GSOB, you're going to be monitoring for management, right? Like, you know, you have GSOB in that area. Now you want to go and survey every oak, at least every oak that is bigger than 8 to 10 inches in DBH, and see which oaks are infested. Ideally, you will survey once a year. And I'm gonna show you later on the life cycle when to survey, but spoiler alert, it's gonna be during the end of the fall and winter. You want to record the number of exit holes recorded each year, and in order to do that, the best way to do it is to mark the exit holes with some kind of either marker. I use the paint markers, but you can also use the that wax crayon. So in any way you want to mark where that exit hole is, like here's an example, or you can put a dot next to it. You want to mark it so the next year you come, you know if that exit hole was already last year or it's new, right? Because when you're going to be monitoring every year, you want to know how many new exit holes you have, especially if you did any kind of management to the area. You want to know if that management worked and how the infestation progresses. Do you want to know about the health of the tree? We take measurements on the crown rating, based on the percentage of leaf loss or how full the canopy is. You want to take some measurement on those bark stains that Kim mentioned. You have that when the damage starts to settle in that area, and now you'd have all your vascular system kind of damaged. The water kind of sits in that location and starts seeping out. And depending on how many stains and how the bark looks, you have different ratings. Once you have in this number 4, the bark starts to crack and fall, that's a tree that is basically going. It's if it's not dead, it's about to die. And then you want to find your amplifier trees, or Kim mentioned them as brood trees. Either term works. So amplifier trees are those trees that are heavily infested. Oh gosh, every time I look at this and I try to fix it and I forget, it's more than 25 exit holes, not less than. I'm so sorry about that. So we want trees with more than 25 exit holes. And these trees that are amplifier trees account for about 10% of the infested trees. But then we know that they contain between 60 and 90% of the population of GSOB. So if we remove these trees from the area, we are removing a big chunk of the beetles, and we are reducing the beetle pressure on the other trees. So best management practice is to identify these amplifier trees and promptly remove them to have less beetle pressure on the rest of the trees. Remember, when even when you remove them, you still have pupae and larvae in the bark of those trees that you're removing. So you have to manage the downwood. So stay tuned for the Beth's presentation, which is, I think, the next one, about how to manage that infested wood. For biological control, we found several probably, parasitoid wasps that could work. This one, the Calosora elongata, has been found actually parasitizing GSOB in here, although parasitism rates are pretty low. And there's other, good candidates. Some of these, like the Phascanophora sulcata, is a parasitoid of Agrillus genus, like GSOB is a parasitoid of emerald ash borer, so it could work as well. But work on this is kind of ongoing, but there's not much funding for this yet. So it's something that could work in the future, but it will take time for us to find a biological control and do all the testings for it. So in the meantime, if we want to protect high-value oaks, we could consider using insecticides. Only use insecticides, though, if you have GSOB in the area, if it's a susceptible oak and it's a big oak, and if you have a healthy tree, right? You are not going to be treating those amplifier trees. We want a tree that is uninfested or very likely infested in any case. So these are our options. We can use contact insecticides, or we can use systemic insecticides. For contact insecticides, you need to apply them once a year to the trunk and the big branches. And, this is something that you could do for big areas. Is less expensive and easier to apply, but, it could have, if it's not applied properly, it could drift into other areas, affect other non-target insects, or even get into bodies of water, which is really, really bad. And the systemic insecticides are applied as trunk injections, right? And that has to be applied every 2 years, which is better. It's more expensive and more labor intensive, but you will have the insecticides inside the tree. However, it requires, to drill a hole in the tree, several actually. So those holes could be a place where pathogens can enter your tree. And also you'll have to find a new area, make a new hole every couple of years to reapply. But these are, your options for chemical treatments. And usually when we do some kind of management plan, sometimes we treat the trees that are likely infested, and then the trees surrounding likely infested, or wherever we had previously an amplifier tree that is going to be removed, as a matter of preventative treatment. So this is an example. This whole area over here is uninfested and did not receive any treatment. And this area here where the infested trees are, we treated all the trees within 300 feet of previously infested trees. Those are options. There's, it's kind of an educated guess to do those 300 feet. You could do a smaller radius around, or it kind of depends on how many trees you have and how much you can spend and how much pesticide you're willing to put into that environment. Lastly, this is the life cycle again. You have your adults emerging from March to September, May to September. You have your larval and pupal stages inside the tree throughout the rest of the year. So we can do the surveys after the adults emerge, ideally. So you'll catch everything. You see all the emergence holes. And then if you're going to be placing a contact insecticide, we want to do it right before the emergence happens. So we want to do it, here it says in May, but in areas with lower elevation, we might even do it in March or April might be a better timing, because all of this might be shifted a little bit earlier. Adults might be emerging a little bit earlier. And so we want to apply them right before all the adults are emerging, so they will, you know, they will be affected by the insecticide when they emerge, and the insecticide would last throughout the emergent season. And lastly, think about replanting and start replanting early. Start once you start managing an area, start the replanting process, so you can have good recruitment. Or, you know, it takes a long time to grow a tree, but you know you're going to be removing trees, so start planning on replanting early on your plan, on your management plan. Don't forget to look at gsob.org. You have tons of information in there, and you can subscribe here for more updates like this this symposium. So make sure you check on this website that has tons and tons of information and resources available for you. All right, thank you. I don't know if we have time for questions or not.
Maria, do we have time for a minute? Thank you, Bea.
Let's go ahead and move on. I know we've kind of fiddled with the schedule a little bit even this morning. Bea, thank you very much. Really great overview of all of our different management options and best times to utilize them. I think we might be getting even some more updates on that later on in our sessions. But thank you again for being here. And again, I just want to reiterate, if you've got questions for the presenters, please put them in the Q&A. Next up, we have Beth Kyrie. I don't know if I'm saying Kyrie, with the Forest Service, and she's an entomologist with the Forest Service, and she's going to talk to us about firewood management and planning. So Beth, thank you for being here. Go ahead.
All right, thank you, Jan. As you said, I'm Beth Kyer, Forest Service, and I'll be talking about firewood. Kim talked about firewood, Bea talked about firewood, and now I'm going to talk about firewood the whole time because management of firewood is that important to management of GSOB. So Kim went over the native range and the expanded range of gold-spotted oak borer. So you can see here down in southern Arizona, we have our native range, and then you look over onto California and we have our expanded range. Now, I do want to point out that this map is missing Ventura County. So please keep in mind that the expanded range is actually bigger than what is shown. The important part of this map is what is between the two yellow polygons. So if we zoom in a little bit closer, our polygons are now kind of orange, but we will see again Arizona on the right and California on the left. And if you look between those polygons, what you see is a lack of green. And again, as Kim said, there's not trees. There aren't hosts there for them to spread naturally. But if we look again, these two red lines here represent two highways, the 10 and the 8. And GSOB is not really known for its driving skills. So more than likely, what we think happened is that people were transporting firewood across these highways from Arizona into California. So they were able to span that arid treeless gap and come over to a land of new hosts. Yeah. So, and obviously you've seen the results of that wood movement has been pretty devastating. And that's partly because once GSOB starts to kill trees and people see dead trees, one of the first thoughts is often, look, it's firewood. And Bea and both Kim said, oak wood is excellent firewood. It burns for a long time and it burns very clean. So it's very coveted and we always want to use it as firewood. But why? What is it about firewood that makes such a good transport system for GSOB? And so to explain that, we'll do a quick physiology lesson. So Kim went over the biology of GSOB and that the larvae develop beneath the bark of the living tissue. And to illustrate that, here is a cross section of an oak tree. Now, from the bottom to the top, we have the dead tissues and the living tissues. So the dark ring on the very outer side of that cross section is the bark, and bark is dead tissue. Now, above that, we have the heartwood. So that's the hardwood, that part of the tree. That is also dead, but that provides a lot of structural support for the tree. Now, around that hardwood or heartwood, we have the xylem or the sapwood. And I would describe xylem as dead but functioning because it does play a role in transport. Now, the tissue above that is the cambium. And then above that, we have the phloem. The phloem is right beneath the bark. And then you have the cambium and the xylem. And the cambium, highlighted here in white, that is where the GSOB larvae spend most of their time. So how does this, knowing this and knowing where they live and where they develop, how does that relate to firewood? So on the left, we have our stump, our cross section. And on the right, we have many cross sections that make up a wood pile. Knowing that GSOB developed beneath the tissues of the bark and in that cambial area, how many areas of this wood pile could possibly be harboring either gold-spotted oak borer larvae or adults? So if you look at it closely and you see, well, where's the bark? Where's that hardwood? Where's that sapwood? And where is the cambium? And I've gone ahead and done that for you. So each of these white lines represents an area that could have gold-spotted oak borer in it. So it could be one piece of wood in the wood pile. It could be many if it's all from the same tree. But just look at this and think how many beetles might emerge from that and move into uninfested trees. So I hope this illustrates the importance of firewood to gold-spotted oak borer and how it can move. But as I said, firewood is very important. We love firewood for burning, for heating our homes. So what do we do? Well, the first thing is we don't move firewood. But what does that mean? I've had people say, does that mean we don't move it from county to county? Does that mean we don't move it from mountaintop district from one side to the other? What does that mean? So generally speaking, we want to keep wood from infested areas in infested areas. So kind of like if your neighbor has the flu, you want them to stay in their house and not come over to your house. Keep the flu over there. Don't bring it over here. And it's the same way. If there's GSOB and firewood in one area, you want to keep it in that area and you don't want to transport it. So if you use firewood at home, you want to source that firewood locally, as close to your house as you can get it. But if you are going camping somewhere or recreating, one of the best things you can do is leave that firewood you have at home, leave it at home. Don't move it, don't bring it with you. Instead, get your wood from your destination or local to the destination. On Forest Service land, many of our campsites offer firewood, they provide it. It is at a cost, but that cost is cheaper than an oak tree. Let's always keep that in mind. What's the benefit of an oak tree and is it worth $4? Okay, so then once you've had your fun, you've had your weekend and you have extra firewood, again, we want to leave that at the campsite. We don't want to transport that back to our houses and leave behind anything that's been used. So second, if we do have infested wood, how do you manage it? And there's several ways to do that, whether you want to use it as firewood or whether you just want to get rid of it and eliminate the possibility of the spread of GSOB. Now, if you still want the wood, you can either season it, meaning dry it out, let it sit, or you can debark it. If you are not concerned with that, you can chip it or you can grind it. So seasoning, there's 3 options for the most part. You can do nothing. You can just leave it where it is and not move it and keep it in its wood pile. That is very cheap and hardly any labor, but they can still emerge and they can still spread. So what we do recommend is that you cover it either with a thick tarp or aluminum screening for at least 2 seasons. During this time, you need to ensure that the material doesn't tear and that it's completely sealed around the wood so that adults don't escape. And That will take ongoing maintenance, and you may have to replace the material throughout that time. But after 2 years, you will have firewood that most likely is free of GSOB, and you don't have to be concerned with adding to the spread of GSOB. The second option, if you do want to maintain the use of that wood for firewood or wood products, is you can debark it. It's definitely quicker, but it is far more labor intensive. If you've ever tried to debark an oak tree, it takes a very long time and a lot of patience, and you end up with very skinned knuckles and hands. But you can do it. So if you remove the bark and the cambial tissues all the way down to the wood underneath, it will be free of GSOB. So that wood can be used as firewood. You can slab it, whatever you need to do. You don't have to worry about GSOB emerging from it. But the excised tissues, GSOB will still be in that. GSOB will still be in the bark, in the phloem, and that cambial tissue underneath. So you still need to treat it. And you can do that the same way. You can either season it or you can chip it. All right, so our last option, we have chipping or grinding. It is the quickest, but it is also the most expensive for the most part. And again, you can't use it as firewood. Chipping the main stem or the bole of the tree, as well as any of the large branches, to smaller than 3 inches will destroy developing larvae as well as adults. However, you will need specialized equipment for several reasons. Most chippers do not chip below 3 inches. And I see there it says to a minimum of 3 inches. So that means 3 inches or smaller. Or you might use something like a tub grinder for those really hard coast live oaks that are super gnarly and super big. So just keep that in mind. However, like I said, chipping is the is the most surefire way. It's what a lot of the agencies do because we have so many trees to manage and deal with. And you do end up with usable chips. Now you can spread those chips. You can sell those chips, you can use them as mulch, but before you do that, I would check with your local fire agency because they can also contribute to fire hazards because chips are wood, right? So that is all I have. I wanted to keep it short because you've heard about firewood multiple times now, and we have a pretty good idea so far of what that means. But I do want to stress one more time that we don't want to move firewood, not just for GSOB, but for multiple insects that are threatening California woodlands and California trees. And many of them are pictured here. Now, it does take money to manage GSOB and it takes effort, but it's worth it because preventing the introduction of these tree killing beetles is something that everybody can do, whether you work for an agency or you heat your house with wood or you are just a recreator. It is something that every single one of us can do to help prevent the spread of this. And it's relatively free to not move firewood. So I will give you back some of your time, and if we have time for questions, I can answer those.
Thank you, Beth. Julie, are there any immediate questions for Beth?
There are a couple, Beth. Thank you for your presentation. One comes from Orange County. The individual would like to know if your program is interfacing with Cleveland National Forest regarding the GSOB infestation in Trabuco Canyon.
Yes, we are. We often work with Cleveland. Cleveland National Forest has been dealing with GSOB the longest out of any of our forests in Southern California. And we do work with them very closely to monitor, survey, fund management, and move forward. I do know that we are currently going to resurvey all of the impacted campgrounds in the Trabuco district. You did have the airport fire, which dealt with some of the infestation, but we need to understand after that what the current infestations look like and how management is going to adapt to that.
Good. Is grocery store firewood considered local?
Yes, grocery store firewood is seasoned, so it's completely dry. You're not going to have any GSOB in it. It usually does not have bark, so you don't need to worry about that. So I would say go for it with the grocery store firewood.
Someone points out that most firewood sold at campsites is not hardwood. So it's a preference, right?
It is a preference, especially when heating your house. Like I said, it's clean, so you don't end up with all that creosote buildup in your chimneys that you would if you were burning pine or even worse, fir. However, that's generally not a concern at campsites. So at campsites, because you're not worried about burning it, you're not worried about your chimney or your flue, and it lights quicker. I actually prefer to use pine at a campsite because that's what's there. It dries faster. It's easier to light because it's not as dense. So you are correct. Most of the firewood at campsites is pine because that is what is available. That's mostly what we are removing around those campsites. But I would say it's just as good to use in a campfire than oak is.
Good. Well, we have a few other questions. Oh, here's another one for you. The other questions are applicable to forthcoming speakers or speakers who have already spoken, so we'll address those later. Would spraying a wood pile, should people spray their wood piles? Basically, as a preventative.
With with a pesticide, it is a possibility. However, I would not recommend it. You'd have to ensure that every part of that wood pile comes in contact with that insecticide. And that's also a lot of insecticide if you're going to do that year after year. So really, if you just keep that bark removed or you season it, that will prevent the use. But the other thing is if you spray it and then you immediately burn it, you would run the risk of maybe contacting some of that chemical as you burn it. And again, you will have to make sure that you hit every surface, every bark surface within that wood pile. And the pesticides that we use to control gold-spotted oak borer are they're not things that you want to spray around in your backyard on your local wood pile in areas that are just going to be sitting there. So I would recommend not to. I would not do that. But I would say if any of the other panelists have different thoughts, then maybe they could add in.
Okay, unless there's some feedback from other panelists about what Beth just suggested, that's all the questions for Beth. Thank you.
Are there, I know a lot of questions have been answered in the Q&A. So everyone participating, please remember to check back there under the answered questions section. But Kim or Bea, if either of you want to, do you have anything more you want to address? I know you've been answering questions, but is there any other comments from any of the speakers we've had so far? We are a little ahead of time. Beth, thank you.
In that case, Jen, if we have some time, can we step back to a couple of questions we didn't have time to answer with Kim and Bea?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Are they available? Kim and Bea?
Yes.
Be sure.
Bea, are you available?
Yes,
Kim?
I
Okay.
am.
Yep,
Um,
I'm here.
Okay, will watering a high value tree be helpful during dry years as a preventative?
Well, you have to be careful about how and when you water oaks. There's not quick short answer. It just depends. Remember that oaks, especially the oaks here, the native oaks here in California, are adapted to, dry summers and wet winters. So if you're going to be watering your tree, ideally you will be watering them during the cold months and not watering them during the summer. You could maybe do one very deep irrigation during a very dry year during the summer. But we always have to be very careful. You have to make sure that is a deep irrigation, and just not just once maybe. You have to be careful because if you have a lot of water in the root area of an oak, especially in the summer when it's warm, you might be creating the perfect environment for other pathogens. You can have oof, it's escaping me right now. But you can have like a root rot just brewing in there. And so, you know, it's very important. You could do it, but you have to do it right. And also avoid watering close to the trunk, just water within the root zone, but not close to the trunk to avoid getting that area wet and getting those pathogens. For example, Phytophthora would love warm and wet roots. You know, there's no straight answer, but I hope this helps. So deep irrigation, not often.
Thank you. Kim, anything to add to that?
Nope, they covered it all.
Okay. Bea, would you like to answer? I see that you started to answer a question about spraying trees that have acorns that are used for consumption.
Sure. So, because oaks are not considered a crop, all the treatments that we have are for you know, trees that are landscape trees. So when you apply any kind of treatment, your label will tell you, okay, this is when you can re-enter the area, or this is when you can consume the fruits of that tree. You know, if it's like for apples or avocados or whatever, you say, okay, after this much time you can consume the tree. This is when you can apply the pesticide safely. There's no such a thing for this kind of treatments for oaks, just because they're not considered crops, so that is not included in the label. So we really do not have that data of like, well, how much of that treatment will end up in the acorns, how much is, you know, it's okay to eat them, or when. So we really don't know. So if you are in an area and, you know, it's up to you how you're going to be managing those oaks. If you know that you're going to be consuming, or people are going to be consuming those acorns, you might want to not do a systemic insecticide in there. You know, that is the problem. That's why we're not saying, oh, you have to treat your oaks. That's an option, and it's treatments don't come without any costs, and there's always that pros and cons on what you do, how much you want to protect that tree, how much risk that tree has versus you know, the downsides of using pesticides. Sadly, we don't have other alternatives. You know, we don't have biocontrol yet that can help us.
Hey, question, Kim. Somebody's moving an oak tree, removing an oak tree, and it doesn't say whether or not it's infested with GSOB. And the question is, should the other trees that don't have symptoms in the area be sprayed?
Well, first you want to confirm that it's GSOB, and if you have previously surveyed your area. You don't want to just go spraying every tree if it's not GSOB. So you want to do surveys, and now is a good time to do surveys around your trees. And because the GSOB have emerged, right? And so now you can know what trees are infested. And if you do have GSOB, it would be good to do a buffer zone. Sometimes people do a buffer zone around infested trees. And that can be decided on how big your parcel is, that kind of thing. But I would survey first to confirm how many trees you have that have GSOB, if it is GSOB, and then we can figure out the best management strategy of how many trees to spray in your area. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Kim. I think we're going to go ahead and get back to our schedule right now. Kim, Bea, and Beth, I want to thank you very much for answering the questions. I think there's some more that has popped up into the Q&A if you have a minute to address those. We're going to go ahead and pick up again. And our next segment here, as I mentioned before the break, we want to share different perspectives and updates and information and case studies from those who have been engaged with Gold-Spotted Oak Borer, within their communities or within their work capacities. So we're going to start out with a kind of a panel with brief presentations from industry and agency representatives, and we're going to kick off with Ricardo Aguilar. He's with Aguilar Plant Care and has done work on Gold-Spotted Oak Borer for several years. Ricardo, thank you for being here. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks for having me. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, like Jan said, I'm going to be speaking more on the treatment side of it, knowing that the panel before me was going to cover biology and what you need to do, to monitor, to have a plan, and then you take the appropriate action when it calls for it. So I'll just be going over a few slides on just basically on a couple different treatment options that we've had really good success with over the years. But again, Ricardo Aguilar, I'm owner of Aguilar Plant Care. We're down here in San Diego, so GSOB has been right in our backyard, and we've been kind of working with other folks like Brett Hutchinson, who's been really involved with the GSOB treatments in the backside of San Diego. Now it's kind of making its way up through the county. And as I was mentioned earlier, it's now moving through other areas of California. So once you see here, how do I go to the next slide? There we go. So for management, we suggest that the treatment window begins around April. You want to have everything completed by June, your treatment. The application is fairly simple. It is a low volume application, and you're really just trying to coat the lower portions of the tree. You're really not getting into the foliage at all. And let me see here. How can I go to the next slide?
I'm the one controlling the slides.
Oh,
so
you are?
You
Okay.
could just tell me.
Yeah, you can just pop them all up. Yeah, so the application is made to the lower portion of the trunk. There are a couple different treatment options, and I know Bea hit on a couple of them. And I'll just kind of go over those options for trunk or basal sprays, we call them. There are a couple systemic applications, but again, how Bea mentioned, sometimes for this particular pest, it's not a real favorable option. Go ahead. So Carbaryl, and I saw a couple folks in the chat talk about it. Carbaryl is a restricted product. It does have to be on your restricted material use permit. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, and so this is a copy of our restricted material use permit. So there's pretty much non-agriculture landscape areas, and it gives you a lot of pretty much rules that you have to follow. One of them is you do have to survey the area that you are going to make this Carbaryl application. Go ahead. This is one example of one of the preserves that we do. We do right here in San Diego. It's a Peñasquitos Preserve. We treat upwards of about close to 300 oak trees. They've had some losses here over the years, but with regular treatments, we've been able to kind of keep it to one here, one there, and we've been able to save and keep other trees, especially of high value, protected. But one of the things with using Carbaryl, which is again a restricted product, you have to reach out to all the registered apiaries within a 1 mile radius, and it has to be made within 48 hours. So you can't just show up and start spraying. There are precautions that you have to take when you are using Carbaryl. Go ahead. And go ahead. And what you have to do is you have to give once you get your list of apiaries within a mile radius, you have to call each single registered apiary and give them a time and place of the application, what crops you're going to be treating. In this case would be the oak trees. Your method of application, which in this case is going to be a trunk spray, a basal application, the active ingredient, and you have to give them the contact of the applicator that's going to be making the application. So in case they have to or something comes up, they'll call you and say, don't spray near here, or if they have questions. So all this has to be done within 48 hours of you making the application. So it's a little time consuming. I know on my end, when we do use Carbaryl, this is something I have to take into account and fit into my schedule, that I have to reach out to anywhere between 10 to 20. There's been times where we've had 30 people we've have to reach out to. Okay. Another requirement when you're using Carbaryl, you have to give an NOI to the county. You do this by going on CalAg permits, and you have 24 hours to do this. You go to the website here. There's Beware, CalAg permits. You fill out the information and you submit an application to apply Carbaryl, and then your ag inspector will either approve it or reach out to you and say, no, I don't think it's a good idea, or have more questions. But it has to get through the proper channels again before you do an application of Carbaryl. Go ahead. Another option is bifenthrin. Bifenthrin, and real quick before I move on bifenthrin, but Carbaryl is becoming a little more challenging to get. I know my supplier, I believe it was last year sometime, said it's getting really hard to get because manufacturers, Bayer, is not producing it as much. And so yeah, it's definitely something that you can't go to Home Depot and get. I don't believe it has Carbaryl as the active ingredient. But this is something that I think between the bee, restrictions, it's something that we might have to look into different options because Carbaryl might not always be available. So the other option is bifenthrin. Bifenthrin, you do the same application, you treat to the lower portion of the trunk. Again, it's a lower, very, very low pressure. You're not spraying the canopy, so it's not going to come in contact with the acorns or anything up on the foliage. You're just applying the insecticide to the lower portion of the trunk. It's not restricted, so the notifications aren't needed that I just spoke about. The issue or drawback is the life of the product may not last as long. So if you do apply in the early part of the treatment window, like in April, you get rain, you get heat, and it breaks down a little faster. You might likely need to make a second application, probably in August, just to make sure that you're covered through that window. So that is a drawback, especially if you're going to be in a large scale where you're spraying, many oak trees, the coordination and the labor. So, it's something that you have to weigh, but, again, it is a different option. Go ahead. And systemics, like Bea hit on it, it's not a preferred method of application for GSOB, mainly because, like in this oak tree, you have to apply the material, usually to the base of the tree, where when you have a large oak like this and you got the street and a house, the chances of you being able to get enough material into a very small planter, probably not very good. The other issue is that, imidacloprid specifically, it moves really slow through the tree, upwards of 60 to 90 days for a full translocation. So again, this is something that if you're going to treat in April for that treatment window, you're probably going to have to make the application around February. And the very last thing is, if the soil is not moist around this tree, the chances of it fully uptaking is very slim. So it's probably just going to get, binded in the soil and not really move throughout the tree like we need it to. So again, it's an option, not the best option, but in certain situations, this might be a tool that you could try. You know, I would recommend this application if it's a couple trees, they're located near a lawn where there's some regular watering, that would be an option. But for many of these strands, there's no irrigation or someone able to, you know, water ahead of time to get that soil moisture there. And again, like Bea hit on it, it's not something you really want to be doing in the summer or in the, you know, warmer months, is watering oak trees, because you could expose it to something else like root rot. Go ahead. The other option, I know it's a picture of spraying. I couldn't find us injecting, a picture of us injecting, but our micro injections. Micro injections are a great tool. Again, there is one of the main products that can work for gold spotted oak borer. Go ahead. Is emibectin benzoate. This is applied to using an injection gun like ArborJet, Arbor Systems. There's other you know, equipment out there that you can do a trunk injection. But the emibectin benzoate, it moves through the tree, and you don't have to make an application till maybe 2 years. So it's a great product, very expensive, very time consuming. We've had instances where we try to inject an oak tree and the application itself for one tree took almost an hour. It's just very slow to uptake. And if you have multiple trees, this could be very time consuming, costly. The cost of this product is not very cheap. It's dependent on the diameter of the trunk. So if you have a larger multi-stem oak tree, the cost is likely going to be higher. But again, it's an option, it's a tool. And in certain situations, we've had success with this as well. But the other drawback is similar to the imidacloprid, the tree has to have some kind of water movement. The soil does have to be moist. If you inject a tree that's drought stressed, you could actually cause more harm and stress the tree, introducing it to possible trunk diseases, botchophoria. And so, yeah, it's something that you have to kind of take into consideration. Next one. Yeah, overall, in conclusion, it's important to have a plan. Like the previous speakers mentioned, once you do your survey, you realize that it's something that you do have to make a plan to treat, and you have trees that you want to focus your efforts on. A lot of this takes time. Surveying is not something that you can get done in an afternoon. It does usually take multiple people. We've spent many hours surveying just 10 to 15 trees, and it takes multiple people to really survey properly. So it's something that you do need a set of helpers, a set of group. Once you have that plan that, okay, we're going to have to focus on these trees and treat, you really have to move on it. And then each site's different. Each site, maybe you inject these 2 trees, and then these 2 trees, they're near water, irrigation, so we can maybe soil treat these, and then we can focus on these 10 and do a basal application. And you can do that, but each site is unique and different, and so just having different tools and approaches, is highly recommended. Yeah, you can go ahead for all of them, Maria. Yeah, and I think that's about it. So again, sorry I sped through it. I just mainly I didn't want to cover too much that was already previously covered, but I just wanted to hit on a couple treatments that we've had success with.
Great. Thank you very much. Really appreciated that quick overview. That was great information. Thank you. Next, we have Ian McBride with CALFIRE. Ian, are you available to share?
Ricardo,
Yeah.
can you address the cost of treatments?
Yeah, cost is it's a tough one. A lot of this is determined by the trunk of the tree. Generally, when we do pricing, we'll have small, medium, large, extra large tree. A small being anywhere around 18 inches DBH, and you kind of go from there. The extra large would be, I think on the most expensive side, if we're doing a basal application, I think we've gotten anywhere between just ballpark $50 to maybe $200 a tree. It just really depends on the access. I know there's some sites that we do where, yeah, we can park our equipment here, but we have to hike up, a pretty far distance to get to the tree. So again, takes more labor, but generally depends on the size of the tree. So when we get calls, a lot of times we'll say, okay, let's go, take the DBH, look at the access points. But generally, I say ballpark would be in the 50 to, $150, $200 a tree if we're doing a basal application. If you're doing the trunk injections or soil systemics, that's a little more specific because, like I said, it's very dependent on the trunk diameter.
And can you speak about inside class rotations?
Yeah, there's not a lot of options. I mean, the carbaryl and the bifenthrin have shown, especially down here where we've had a lot of experience treating over the years, have shown to be very effective. The other options, I guess you could do other systemics like a dinotefron. I haven't tried it because again, the expense is quite high. There really hasn't been much rotation as far as I know for products over the years, just because it's been so effective and it's a one-time application, on occasion 2 times, but yeah, it's usually going to be one of those products.
Okay, great. Let's go ahead and move on to Ian McBride. Thank you,
Hi.
Ricardo.
You're
Appreciated your
welcome.
time.
Thanks, Jan.
Okay, Ian. Go
Hi, how's
ahead.
it going? I do not have a slide for a PowerPoint for the group, but I do have a small report that I can give.
Okay.
So BDU resource management. Quick introduction, Ian McBride. I'm a Forester 1 with CALFIRE here in San Bernardino. Our unit also represents Inyo and Mono counties. Our resource management organization here in San Bernardino, it's built up with David Haas, who's the unit forester, Carol Snow, who's our environmental scientist, Drew Smith, who's our pre-fire engineer, and myself. So in BDU, we plan on soon beginning surveying in the Lake Arrowhead and Crestline areas for GSOB. We're going to try to time it for once a lot of the fall leaves begin to drop off the oak trees. In San Bernardino, we have 5 known areas where there are GSOB infestations: Oak Glen, which is outside of Yucaipa, Sugarloaf, which is in the Big Bear area, the newly discovered Crestline, which is in the Lake Arrowhead area, Silverwood Lake State Park, which is on the desert side, and as well Wrightwood, which is on the desert side. So our crews have assisted in the past with the removal of GSOB trees in Oak Glen, Sugarloaf, and Wrightwood. Kind of talking about some of the challenges that we have as a department. And also we are predominantly a fire department and not a tree service. We try to help out where we can. But some of the challenges include our current crews are not able to climb trees and are really only able to fall trees outside of the falling distance of power lines and homes. Due to the high density of homes that we have up in the San Bernardino Mountains and the very small plots of land that these homes are on, it's very difficult for us to find infested trees that we are able to treat, just due to the complexity, not being able to climb them, and also the potential for us dropping a tree on a house or power line. In years past, our Pilot Rock Fire Center was an inmate camp, and we did have a number of trained tree climbers that we trained, and they're part of a bug crew. During that kind of practice with the inmates, they were often there for multiple years, so they were able to function as a tree climbing crew for multiple years. We do now have a bug crew at our Pilot Rock Fire Center, but these are now paid seasonal firefighters. And due to the high turnover of fire crews and as well the supervisors for those crews. We have not yet been able to train these crews in tree climbing. Some of the other limitations with our bug crew is their first duty is to fire response. So oftentimes during the summer and in the fall, we lose them to fire response, to going and responding to fires in unit and outside the unit. We're also have a number of internal fuels reduction projects that our crews are utilized. Our crews are also regularly go through different types of fire trainings, and so they get committed with those. And as well, these crews are predominantly built up of seasonal hires, so they're only available for working for 9 months, and most are separated during non-fire season, which is kind of the window in between fall surveying and spring emergence. So when our crews do go out, and we haven't really cut down many GSOB trees in the past year or two, but we have utilized chippers. We are hoping our chips get down to that 3-inch minus, but for many of you who are involved in the chipping of the limbs and the branches, it is very difficult to actually get down to that 3-inch minus size to kill the bug. And as well, we do have some deep barkers, which is like a attachment you put on a chainsaw. That does work, but again, it's very labor intensive. We have had good success with just taking the bark off with chisels and or other devices, and then just chipping that and then leaving the firewood for the homeowner. We continue to work with our local partners, Edison, the Inland Empire Resource Conservation District through their RFFC grant, and as well the Mountain Rim Fire Safe Council. Those are some of our largest partners here in the San Bernardino Mountains. David Haas, the unit forester, and myself, we do go out and survey dead oak trees. We often and regularly get phone calls about dead oak trees in our mountains, whether they are they just call our headquarters, or if they first contact one of our other partners, and then we'll go out and survey those trees. Yeah, that's about what I have. If there's any questions.
Thank you, Ian. Appreciated that update. Okay, next we have Ron Durbin, who is the chief with the Forestry Division of the Los Angeles County Fire Department. We appreciate you being here. Ron, are you able to?
Super. Yeah, so I'm Ron Durbin. I am the Forestry Division Chief for LA County Fire. We've been dealing with Goldspotted Oak Borer for quite some time now, since 2015. I'm going to give you a basic overview of how we've been dealing with it in the county. For those of you that have actually seen one of these, good for you. I have never seen one yet, a live one, only in a specimen jar. So if you have, amazing, right? But it's very, very rare that you actually see an adult. So I just thought I'd share that with you. So LA County has a number of goals to manage GSOB. Our key is really education and outreach to get to all of our communities, to let them know what it is and the potential impacts of what GSOB is going to do to their ecosystem where they live, and to the ecosystems that they may want to recreate in. So the big thing for us, the bigger picture is that we need to slow the progress. We need to buy time so that the ecosystem has time to adapt to the new invasive insect. We follow all the same things that Beth and Kim and Bea have talked about, right? The buy it where you burn it, the don't move firewood. Bea talked about an EDRR, an early detection rapid response plan. That's been a huge component. I'll talk about that in a bit. Of what we're doing to make sure that as soon as we know something's out there, we have the ability to go manage it. We rely, as Kim mentioned, we rely on the community to help us identify and see what it is and tell us, hey, I've got a problem with a tree. And so then we will send out folks We just started a new unit in our county in the forestry division. It's the invasive pest management unit. I've got 3 people assigned to it, and they're dedicated to basically the EDRR, to go identify, go map, go survey, and then mitigate after that. And then the bigger picture still, though, is that GSOB, as Kim mentioned, it likes the larger trees. And so there's a key component to reforestation about modifying age class. And so you can do it in a couple different ways. You can either plant with seedlings, or you can identify saplings that are in your landscape and screen and protect those to allow them to grow as the dead trees are removed, or you start losing more trees. So that's super helpful in the 2 ways that we can deal with it. So particularly with saplings and screening, there's something called release, where a new tree dries, now there's new sun, there's additional nutrients, and so that tree can live a little better and easier. We've seen that in a number of places where we've worked in Green Valley, where some of those new trees have really shot up since they've been exposed to sunlight and soil. So that's just one of the different ways that we deal with it. So this is the key for us. It's really important that you develop relationships with all the other agencies that are going to help you. And in particular, CALFIRE and Kim has been fantastic. We work with LA County Agricultural Weights and Measures. They help us with identification, setting traps, but they don't really do traps for GSOB because it just doesn't work all that well. Shot hole borer is fantastic. But County Ag Weights and Measures, they're one of our vendors that help us with tree removals. I definitely have to work with LA County Regional Planning. There's a number of different environmental regulations that we have to deal with. There's SEA ordinances, right? Significant ecological areas that we have to deal with. Particularly in the Santa Monica Mountains, we have a local coastal program that we have to deal with, and a North Area Plan that are similar, right? They work together. The CEO and the Chief Sustainability Office is really important, that they're the ones that are sort of driving the EDRR. In support, we have the Board of Supervisors. Particularly, we have 5 districts in the county. North County for us is the Supervisor District 5, Santa Clarita, north of basically the Angeles National Forest north. That's District 5. And then SD3 is the 3rd district, and that's the Santa Monica Mountains. 2 key players that have significant numbers of oaks. We're also dealing with MRCA, Mountains Recreation Conservation Authority. They have one of the infestations that recently came up. The state park and the Forest Service, of course, with Beth is very important. And one of our key players is Southern California Edison. They were the ones that actually discovered GSOB in Green Valley for us. Public Works has a role in that because it's unincorporated county. And so they have street trees associated with it. And now we're working with Parks and Recreation about, working with, we have our community forest management plan that's also associated with the EDRR. And so all of that is really important towards building the relationships. So as Bia said, you don't want to be trying to figure out who do I need to talk to when something happens. And so all of this has been pre-plumbed. So as we find new GSOB infestations, we know who to contact and how to get started. And the last one is really important. Our fire safe councils, our Firewise communities, the HOAs, these are the eyes on the ground that are super important for all of us. And they help us with that early detection component. So this is what I have seen. I've done the same thing that Kim has done. You chopped into a tree and you have the larva fall out. So most likely if you see D holes in a tree and you do that, you're probably going to encounter this more than anything else. So of course, that's the telltale sign. And as Kim said, there's lots of different symptoms, but you don't really know for sure until you've confirmed D holes and you found larvae and you see in the gallery. So all of those things can confirm that it's actually GSOB. But this one really here is the telltale sign.
I had like 3 questions. Someone asked about
So for LA County, everything else has been talked about. But what's really important is, and I think what's actually slightly missing in Kim's presentation was the threat to the Santa Monica Mountains. We have about 600,000 coast live oaks, and it's not there yet. We haven't identified it yet, but we're looking, and that's part of that early detection process. So that's the greatest concern, 600,000 oaks in the Santa Monica Mountains. So I'll give you a quick tour of, how it came to LA County. Again, it was initially discovered in 2015 in Green Valley by Southern California Edison. Thank you to all you folks that are here with Edison. Really appreciate your eyes on the ground and letting us know when you see something that might be GSOB. It may turn out not to be, but that's the first start, and then we'll go investigate and figure out what it is. After we found it in Green Valley 2015, it moved slightly south to Bouquet Canyon in 2018, about the same time as Ian just mentioned, we found it in Wrightwood. So that's the border between LA County, San Bernardino County, and Black Oak. And just recently, we discovered it in Santa Clarita at the border of the 5 and 14 freeway. And then in Chatsworth, as Kim mentioned, in Box Canyon, that's just about half mile across the border of the county line. Again, Santa Monica Mountains, thank goodness we haven't found it yet. But with this discovery in Box Canyon, it's probably about 3 to 4 miles from the Santa Monica Mountains proper. So we're preparing for that event when it gets there. We still haven't found it yet in the foothills on the south side of the Angeles National Forest. And let's go to the next slide, and I'll kind of give you a quick tour on a map. So up on the top, next to Quartz Hill, that's Green Valley. Bouquet Canyon is just south of that. And then you keep going south, you see Santa Clarita, that's East Rice Canyon, Placerita Canyon. Those were recent discoveries this year. Southwest of that is Browns Canyon. Again, that's Ventura County. And then south of that is the Box Canyon discovery, and that's right on the border with LA County. So you can sort of see how it's moved, and has been mentioned, it didn't move on its own. Somebody helped it. And it's that firewood movement that we're really concerned about. And we have a firewood reseller at the top of Topanga where you see Simi Valley next to the red star square. That's where we have a firewood reseller. We don't know if it came from him or not, but it's a possibility. And we're really concerned about firewood burning communities, which Green Valley is. And that actually was the ground zero for where we found it. It was right next to a firewood reseller, and it just kind of blossomed from there. We believe that's the same thing that's happened here in the Chatsworth Boxwood or Box Canyon area. That's somewhat of a firewood burning community. And again, our greatest concern now is the Santa Monica Mountains as you go down directly south of that Box Canyon, where it says Malibu. There's firewood communities, burning communities there. And so we have great concerns with that. So this was the zone of infestation back in 2020. I think Kim mentioned that it's expanded now. The only one missing is to the west of LA County. That's Ventura County. And I think Kim will end up expanding the ZOI shortly. But you can see that it's already impacted all the other counties, right? San Diego, Orange, San Bernardino, Riverside, and of course, LA County. Super. So this is what we're concerned about. This is, San Diego County. And this is exactly what the Santa Monica Mountains have available to it if it gets there. So quickly, I need to give you a comparison and why the concern to the Santa Monics is so important. So Green Valley has an estimated 15,000 oaks. Santa Monica Mountains has an estimated 600,000 coast live oaks. So that's the largest pocket in the county that's continuous. But it does range from all the way from the east side, all the way through Santa Clarita. And then even in the interior, we have areas in Whittier that have coast live oaks. We've been lucky so far that we haven't discovered there. Doesn't mean it's not there yet, but we just haven't discovered it yet. But again, of course, our primary concern now is the Santa Monica Mountains and managing it if it gets there. So quickly, Green Valley stats. So again, the estimated population was 15,000. We've already removed 1,300 trees. We have another 150 scheduled. These are basically dead trees. And so about 10% of our population of oaks has been removed. We're treating a number of trees with emamectin benzoate. These are injections, right? We're not doing any kind of spraying at this point. And so we have about another, 11% there with infested trees. So more than 20%. The focus has been trying to identify the amplifier or brood trees and getting that population out. That's been really key to the success in Green Valley. The forest looks completely different than when I first encountered it. I started the project back in 2018, even though it was found in 2015. So this is one of the things that we've done. We've mapped, we basically touched every single tree in Green Valley. Initially it was collectorite, it was a survey 123, now it's field maps, it's an Esri product. We take data on every tree that we touch, its DBH, crown size, height and width of the canopy, number of holes, the crown thinning, we'll take a rating on crown thinning. And that's really important because we don't treat any trees that have a 3 or higher in the crown rating, meaning the 25 to 50% of the crown is now missing. We only treat trees that either have no, right? They may have an exit hole, but they don't have any crown thinning, or they have just a little bit of crown thinning. But as soon as it gets to a 3 rating, then it's really a removal tree. We also take data for staining. And then this one is really important because all of these trees in Green Valley are really associated with structures. And so taking that tree down, having a database that told us which ones are going to be really hard to take down and which ones were the amplifier trees. So those were the priorities for us. This is just a quick shot. It doesn't show all of the dots that show the surveys, but it gives you a representation of the maps that we're able to create. So these high difficulty trees, all of them, in fact, most all of the trees were taken out by contractors. We initially started our treatments with debarking trees. And as been mentioned, it's super labor intensive. It's very costly. We were doing it with our LA County fire crews. We could only do about 2 to 3 trees per week. And you could see we took out, 1,300 trees. We were never going to get through all of those trees that were infested in time. So we went, we wrote a grant. It's a forest health grant through CALFIRE, the California Climate Investments Forest Health Grant. We were awarded $3 million. We're close to finishing that off. We started that in 2019. COVID hit, they granted us an extension. We are now wrapping up. Our performance period is March of 2025, so we're closing out. Initially in the grant, all we were doing was removing trees, the whole tree chipping. And we do that because as a best practice, not to allow any of that firewood to leave the community, which is really important. And so part of what we do in order to get to the trees, we have a right of entry permit that every single homeowner has to sign for us, which allows us to inspect and to treat. And inside that right of entry permit, we tell them all of these chips that we're going to generate are going to stay here either on your property or we'll find something close by. So all of the chips stay in the community. We don't transport anything outside the community. We have recently, because we were doing really well with the grant, we asked CALFIRE to amend our grant to allow us to do systemic injections. We've been using emamectin benzoate, as Ricardo mentioned. But again, we only use it on a crown rating of 3 or less, or I'm sorry, less than 3. That's been going really well, but we don't have enough data yet to say, okay, this is really good. It looks good, but I'd like to have more data. Okay. Some of the things that we're talking about, because Green Valley is sort of the test case for what's going to happen when it gets to a larger community, particularly the Santa Monica's. Whether we do trunk spray or not with carbaryl, there's real concerns about carbaryl and bifenthrin and related to persistence in the landscape, related to translocation. Is it going to move inside the landscape? This is the Santa Monica Mountains recreation area, and that's why it's a great concern. They talked about water quality and having it move to blue lines, and there's all of that throughout that community. And so there's great concerns for us. They're using another pesticide application. So that's all going to have to be worked out through the community. We already have public pushback using any sort of pesticide in that area. So the community is going to have to recognize that if we don't do anything, we end up with the early stages of GSOB that Kim showed earlier, where 50% of the forest is lost or more, right? And 90%, as Kim said, of those trees were infested. So the concern, of course, is what do we do? How do we treat trees, right? We have the three known, right? We can debark, we can whole tree chip. We may be able to use systemic ejections, but again, that community is really against any sort of pesticide. Our team in IPMU, the Invasive Pest Management Unit, they're gonna try some new things in Green Valley, of course, not in the Santa Monica's yet. I think immediately we would go to tree removal and chipping. But in Green Valley, where it's already there, they're gonna try some things like metal screens on the trunks or wrapping with plastic, just a physical barrier to prevent. I don't know how that's gonna work. I'm skeptical, but we'll see. I'm gonna let them try it. They've also talked about maybe a hot water power wash to reduce the egg population. I don't know. I'm going to let them try it and see how it goes. So we'll see. So this was our ground zero, right? One of the first trees. That's typically what it looks like. You'll see it through the top, crown thinning pretty. And as Kim said, you'll see persistent dead leaves on the tree. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so this is what we've removed. Again, about 1,300 trees. This is on a unimproved parcel. You can see it's all adjacent to improved properties. And so for us, we have this fire prevention issue where the environmental forestry is the environmental component of the fire department. So that's why we got tasked with this. But we would have dead standing trees in a wildland urban interface environment, intermix environment. And so having dead standing trees is really not a good thing in terms of fire. And so immediately we got tasked with, let's see if we can help this community. We initially got a $200,000 fire prevention grant from CALFIRE. That was worked in 2019. Again, we applied right away for the forest health grant after getting a study on all the conditions inside Green Valley. Thankfully, we were rewarded. This is the result. This photo here is the result of that forest health grant. So you can see there's a number of trees that were removed. We typically do not go back and trunk and grind the trunks. Here's a little tip. If you can get the tree before it's fully dead, you will get sucker sprouts out of those trunks. And because GSOB doesn't like the large size or doesn't like the smaller size DBH, then you'll get trees that grow pretty rapidly. And so that's what we found outside in Green Valley when the tree is not completely dead. Let's go to the next slide. So this is one of our contractors. The chipper there you see is a Vermeer. We had some moorbark chippers. And so one of the issues you'll find is that these coast live oaks are really tough on equipment. And we killed a number of moorbark chippers. The commercial Vermeer seems to work fairly well, but you can see that they're cutting it to get it into a size enough that will fit into the chipper. And so that's one of the ways to manage GSOB. You can see just behind the chipper, there's a pile of chips and they'll just stay on site. Let's go to the next slide. This is one of the preferred methods. So here's a tub grinder. You can see the chips off to the left. Some of them are not -3, and those would have been rerun back through the tub grinder to change their size down to the -3 that we need. But this is super effective. It's really efficient. You have a large number of trees. It's able to handle that super hard wood of the coast live oak. Let's go to the next slide so you can see our chip pile that came out of This particular location, so we moved it throughout the Green Valley community. You can see some of the larger size chips are greater than -3, and they were required to run those back. They'd scoop them up, run them back through the chipper, the tub grinder, and see if we can get them down to the -3. And the next slide. One of the things that we do as we survey, we tag all of our trees. If they didn't have a tag, after we remove a tree, we'll take the tag off prior to them removing it, and we'll stick the tag back in the trunk. So it just gives us another marker on all of the trees that we removed. And then this tells us particularly related to the size, right? What type of tree, was it fully dead? Just another indicator for the mapping piece. Next slide. So we've worked on an early detection rapid response plan. It's one of the things that came out of my early work. I work with the Resource Conservation District of the Santa Monica Mountains. It was a partnership with the Board of Supervisors. The detection piece that we talked about earlier was critical. And then the response piece is super critical. There's a jurisdiction for each of these parcels out in the community. Some of them are unincorporated county. That would be LA County Fire's jurisdiction. That's where we're going to go get a right of entry permit, go talk to the homeowners and say, this is what we can do to help you. We'll try to write grants to help them remove trees because removing them can be super expensive. Depending on whether it's a high difficulty tree, it could be, $1,500 per tree. We definitely support all of our partner agencies. So if the jurisdiction is like the last one, MRCA, we connected with them, we shared with them our survey method, and then all of the different methods that we have used over the past. So that's kind of the critical piece related to EDRR, finding it early, and then what do you do and who manages it after that? And so building those relationships again, as Bia said, super important. And then the next part of the reforestation or EDRR plan is that reforestation component. We have 2 nurseries in LA County, one in Malibu, one on the east side. So we'll end up growing, and we're already growing, trees that have acorns from the local area. So we're not introducing another species into the area. And then the final component is that this EDRR is in alignment with the Chief Sustainability Office and their community forest management plan. And so it's just one component, and it all ties together. And that collaboration is super, super important. So here's quick. This is the final slide. So this is the worry, 600,000 oaks in the Santa Monica Mountains. What do we do? How do we manage it? With all of the concerns that I've talked about, particularly environmental concerns, right? How do we manage it? And how does the community accept the things that we're going to have to do to manage it? And with that, next slide, and you'll have my contact information. And thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you, Ron. Really appreciated that overview, that update, and that really good look into how your team has addressed the issue and developed partnerships for any future outbreaks. So thank you for sharing your time. We don't have time to answer questions live, but I think there are some questions that you might be able to answer in the Q&A, if you don't mind. Maria is gonna, I think, share a couple of quick poll questions just to make sure we're all still here. Okay, please go ahead and put any additional questions in the Q&A for any of our presenters. And thank you again, speakers, for addressing those behind the scenes. Really appreciate everybody's engagement, including in the chat. So I'd like to introduce Jolene Tam. She was not available to present today, but she has joined us in the room and is with UC Riverside and also the La Jolla Band of Luiseño Indians, and is doing research on Goldspotted Oak Borer here in northern San Diego County. She's agreed to go ahead and address some concerns that have been posted both in the chat and in the Q&A that are related to tribal concerns. So Julene, I appreciate you jumping in real quick. She's just going to take 5 minutes and address some of those concerns for us because they keep popping up and we want to make sure that they do get addressed. So I'd like to introduce Jolene. We'll just take 5 minutes to squeeze this in and then move on to our next.
Thank you, Jan. And I may have missed some questions because I got logged out and logged back in. Julie, do
Okay.
you have the questions ready?
I do. The
Or
first
Randall.
question, Jolene, is about is there any been work done with tribal prescribed burning for
Yes.
GSOB?
We're currently researching it. We don't know, and we won't know for a while about the impacts. However, burning, cultural, and prescribed fire increase forest health. So it's a winning situation already. It might take a longer if it doesn't specifically target gold-spotted oak borer, but as long as we're improving forest health, we're moving in the right direction. Working on the mixed age class forests, and just assisting with reintroducing fire to the land. I suspect that the understory burns aren't going to be a silver bullet per se. That the heavily infested trees, they're not going to be completely consumed by the fire, and they're still going to be putting off beetles. But hopefully we can implement forestry practices that include cutting down those heavily infested trees, stacking the brush around them so we burn the most heavily infested parts of the forest. The trick is the setting up the resources to do that. So it's going to take some time, but as long as we're moving towards optimal forest management with fire, we're moving in the right direction. And then hopefully in another 10 or 12 years, I can tell you exactly how GSOB reproduction in the forest within prescribed fire happens.
Jolene, I think a lot of the questioning relates to traditional ecological knowledge and specifically the use of acorns culturally as a food source, as well as other vegetation that might be growing around the oak trees that might be impacted by spraying that might get on that. Can you address that at all?
If we apply insecticide to an individual tree, it's normally to preserve the shade or impact for aesthetics. For example, we might choose to spray 200 trees that are in areas where campers may be, but acorns generally aren't collected from there. They're collected from other areas that include black acorns, which state parks is one of the gathering areas, and it's great because they don't use any insecticide up there. So it's just about not collecting in the areas where treatment occurs, because treatment only occurs to specific trees because it's really expensive, and usually that preservation for the tree is for different reasons other than food production. It's not the greatest answer, I know, but until we figure out how to ensure the survival of a few trees while we get hit with this GSOB epidemic, it's just about safeguarding a few resources. So, does that answer the question?
Randall, anything else in the chat? I think what you just posed was mostly about gathering and eating and from the understory and the acorns. So I have no more questions related to tribal concerns. But in the
Right.
chat,
I
perhaps.
think that covers it, and I believe that Beth is also going to hit on TEK in her
Yes.
next talk. So I think we're probably good.
Okay. Thank you, Julie, Randall, and Jolene. We appreciate you coming on last minute to address some of those concerns.
Exactly.
All right, moving on. I would like to introduce Callie Squires. She is with the Mountain Communities Fire Safe Council, and she's going to share a community case study.
Just bear with me 1 second. I'm going to share my slides.
All right, thank you, and welcome, Callie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Okay, so my name is Callie. I am the executive director of the Mountain Communities Fire Safe Council. We are located up in the communities of Idlewild, Pine Cove, Mountain Center. Pretty much we serve anybody above 3,000 feet in the San Jacinto Mountains. We are a wildland urban interface. We are surrounded by the San Jacinto district of the San Bernardino National Forest. So, you know, we have a number of things to share with you, and I don't know if my colleague Kim Fryer is still on the call or not. She may have had to drop off. She is our GSOB program manager here. Unfortunately, she had another commitment this morning come up that she could not get out of, but I'm here to tell you about all of the work that Kim and our organization have been doing. So I would like to first start with a little bit of information with credit to Dr. Tom Scott at UCANR. He had submitted an article for one of our previous newsletter publications about the elder oaks of Idlewild. So, you know, we are a very densely forested area up here. We have a mix of black oaks. We have some canyon live oaks and lots of pines, firs, and cedar trees as well. So, you know, over the last couple of years, we have been cataloging the black oaks predominantly because that is the species that we have the most of, subject to infestation. So what we're finding is that we have some oaks here that are nearly 350 years old. There is a black oak in Pine Cove, which is where I live, that we believe has been around since the late 1600s. So we are talking about some very large trees, long-standing, also subject to other conditions, you know, that come with age. We find that the GSOB beetles really, really like these, the big trees, the old guys, and they're not so interested, as we know, in the ones with the smaller DBHs, those younger trees, those maybe under 8 or 10 inches. So here are a couple photos of some nice big old ones. This tree on the left has been completely hollowed out from age, from drought, from a number of conditions. It was deemed to be a hazard. There is a hiking trail that runs right alongside it. I don't know if you can see where those little posts are on the left. So that was removed because it was a public safety hazard. We have another image of a round on the right, which also starting to hollow out from age. But if we were to count the rings, we would see that that tree was alive and growing in Idlewild during the American Civil War, which is pretty cool. Not the war part, the age of the tree part. So we want to talk about the arrival of GSOB to the San Jacinto Mountains. You know, it came here on Firewood. You know, Beth had reiterated, all of us really are big on this don't move firewood attack. So, you know, that's what happened. It was first discovered here in Idlewild Pine Cove about 2012, came up on Firewood. In 2014, there was a survey performed where there were 53 infested trees were identified in 2014. A decade later, that number is likely in the thousands and thousands of trees. So here is something curious. If we look on the left-hand side at that photo, we see a nice, dry, looks well-seasoned piece of oak firewood with some telltale D-shaped exit holes. This photo was captured by one of my field staff when they went out to a private homeowner's land to conduct an assessment. And we can see this firewood here. And apparently there was a whole cord of it pretty much with exit holes stacked really nice and neatly up against a living oak tree, which you can see there in the background. So we really, really try and hammer in the message about not moving firewood, about buying it where you burn it, because this sort of situation is exactly the sort of thing that we don't want to see. So we have events every summer. Our Fire Safe Council invites partnering agencies as well as community members to our office. We give away hot dogs. We try and get as many people to come in so that we can hit them over the head with education relating to forest health and wildfire prevention. So here is a photo of us. I'm bummed that it's in black and white, but it was in our local paper. This was from our summer event last year, I believe in 2023. You can see in the front, we have a big inflatable GSOB. Her name is Gertie, and she belongs to Laura Dyberg at the Mountain Rim Fire Safe Council. She was very popular. We arranged to borrow it from Laura, and the community loved her. She's really cute. She's really realistic. I mean, as cute as a bug can be. But she's oversized, and she is an attention getter, and she gets the message across. You know, I spoke about how we emphasize not moving firewood. Again, when folks come to our meetings, to our events, excuse me, we have all kinds of literature available, some of it from, you know, don'tmovefirewood.org, some of it from gsob.org. We really take that opportunity to tell our community what is going on and what they can do about it. One of the nice things is that we are starting to find that the community is listening. So this text box here on the lower right was a comment from a local person in a local Facebook group. Somebody had commented, hey, I'm looking for firewood. Should I burn eucalyptus? Is avocado better? And so on. And what we're finding is that as people who are new to the community ask these questions, people who've been here a while are now repeating our message, which is great. So, you know, and we talk about being hyper-specific. If you live in Idlewild or Pine Cove, buy wood from Idlewild or Pine Cove, not from Hemet, not from Banning, not from Temecula, you know, as this message says. So that is a very positive thing. I think we're starting to get the community buy-in. I do a number of presentations to local homeowners groups. I have presented at the Rotary, at the Legion, at the Garden Club. We try and engage our community members to be that sort of first line of assessment. So, you know, the best GSOB hunting tool is our own eyes, is looking for those telltale signs, exit holes, you know, bark staining, canopy thinning, all of those things that some of the previous presenters have spoken about at length. You know, we really try and teach our community members what a GSOB infested tree looks like, how to spot one. And then we urge them to give us a call, and we can take it from there. So, you know, when I go out, one of the things that folks love is we have from UCCE our little samples, right? So I've got this little bug guy in a species container, right? we go out and we've got, it's hard to see, right? We've got our bark samples with D-shaped exit holes. We come armed with all of the flyers and pamphlets and photos that we can, really trying to get community participation. We want to get the message out, and we want people to be actively involved. You know, in our towns, we live here because we like the trees, right? So we want to keep them, and people are into it. And that's a very positive and reassuring sort of thing. This is one of the greatest tools that we have. So folks love this little card. There's pictures of it. You can see on the slide, the red hole is actually a cutout of essentially a D-shaped exit hole that is pretty close to being the size that you might find it in the tree. So, you know, armed with a magnifying glass and one of these cards, you can check your own trees in your backyard. And that's what we're really trying to count on people to do. Let me go back. The other part is that we are trying to engage the children. Kids love treasure hunts. If we show them the bug and we tell them to look for the holes, little kids also have better eyesight than I do anyways. So, you know, we love getting the kids involved. Check the trees in your yard. Check the trees at the park the next time you go to the playground. Just let us know what you're seeing. So, you know, if a homeowner contacts us, so you know, we're getting the messaging out. We are asking for participation. We are asking for our community members to keep their eyes open. If they find what they suspect to be the sign of a GSOB infestation, they give us a call. So our Fire Safe Council has had funding for the last handful of years, both through forest health and technically through some wildfire prevention, some fuels reduction grants once the trees are dead. We have grant funding from CALFIRE to assist homeowners with these projects. So we have a twofold approach. Since the spring of 2022, we have been applying a bifenthrin, which is the prophylactic, the barrier insecticide, like Ricardo Aguilar spoke about. A basal application to the trees, so we don't spray the foliage. We go up the tree, excuse me, just onto the main, like on the main trunk, or if it is a multi-stem, the main stems of the tree. This year in 2024, we actually treated about 3,000 trees with bifenthrin. Now we are up, our communities are sort of between, I'd say 4,000 and 6,200 feet. We get a lot of black oaks growing in there. This program is voluntary. So again, any homeowner who is looking for some assistance, they need to contact us. We are not in the business of enforcement. We do the best, like I said, to get our messaging out and to get people engaged, but we can't force anybody to do any of this. So that, you know, it affects what some of our statistics look like. But also, you know, 3,000 trees on privately held parcels, considering we're only a population of, you know, maybe 6,000, 7,000 people all told, 3,000 trees sprayed is actually pretty impressive. And we were quite pleased with that. The funding for the spray treatment came from CALFIRE Forest Health funding that came through National Forest Foundation. We also had in previous years a Riverside County Forest Health grant that we were the administrators of. The county actually was the recipient, but being that we are the boots on the ground, Riverside County contacted us to manage the program locally. So the nice thing about both of those programs is that this spray treatment was performed for the homeowner at no cost to them. So that was 100% grant funded. It is easier to get people engaged with things they don't have to pay for. There was a question previously on cost. I can tell you that over the last 3 years, we put this program out to bid every time. The bid process is competitive, and we have paid over the last 3 years anywhere between $50 and $100 per tree for this bifenthrin program with an adjuvant that helps it adhere to the bark. So this is just a little screenshot, a little snapshot of part of our oak catalog. So using Survey 123 and then imported into ArcGIS, we have a GIS specialist who helps us wrangle all of this data onto nice map points. We, like Chief Durbin was saying, we inventory the trees. Every tree, if it doesn't already have a tag, is given a tag with a unique ID number. We take photos of the tree, we take measurements, we evaluate the canopy, we count the number of exit holes, we do the staining evaluation. And so each one of these dots on this map represents a tree, and we have all of those statistics for each one of those trees. This map displays in particular trees that were sprayed this spring in 2024. So, one of the things that we come up against, of course, is like Chief Durbin was saying about the Santa Monica Mountains, there are a lot of folks in this community who do not like pesticides. So we have opted for bifenthrin as a prophylactic barrier spray. Like I said, nobody is forced to participate in this program. So if you don't want us to spray your trees with pesticides, don't sign up. I can't make you do it. But so we find that, bifenthrin is a little more gentle than carbaryl, as we've sort of talked about already this morning. It is applied with an adjuvant that helps it adhere to the tree. Because of our elevation, our season is a little shorter. I know that Ricardo had spoken about, spray treatment starting as early as April. We've probably still got snow on the ground in April. We typically treat up here late May, early June. The other thing is, because of the funding and sort of wanting to hit as much as we can with the money that we have available, we apply the bifenthrin only once a year. And by applying it in late May or early June, we are hoping that not only does it affect the larvae that are leaving in the spring, but may also be still effective when the adults return to lay eggs in the fall. Because typically up here, again, because of the weather conditions, that'll be less than 6 months later. So Aguilar, Ricardo there, was actually our spray treatment contractor for the county program. I believe that was 2022. So, when we go out and we spray the trees, we make sure that we are giving the community as much information as we can to make them feel okay about the choice. Explains how it works. On the right here, this green card was a door hanger. So, a number of our residents are only part-time. So when we went to spray the trees, or when the contractor, I'm not spraying them myself, when the contractor goes to spray the trees, there might not be anybody home. So we did these door hangers, provides a little bit of information on the product that was applied, recommends that they keep their pets inside, and so on. The pushback from the community, I feel, is becoming less and less every year. as far as being resistant to pesticide use, because I think people are really starting to realize that, yes, pesticides can be bad, but 100% oak mortality is also pretty bad. We also have funding through various grant programs for the removal of heavily infested GSOB affected trees. So those are those amplifier trees, those brood trees that you've heard our partners speak about all morning. We have funding for this under a couple different programs. Again, one that is specific to GSOB affected trees, and one that is actually more so for wildfire prevention for fuels reduction. So if we have an oak tree that has probably died of GSOB, that is dead, it's not an amplifier tree. It's not at risk of becoming a host. It's not really going to make the bug problem worse, but it certainly is a concern for fuel loads. And that really is what we're trying to manage up here. Excuse me. Like Chief Durbin said about the communities that they're working on in LA County, a lot of the times these oak trees are right up against houses. It might be on a 1/10 of an acre lot, and so we do have some of the same access problems and so on. But we managed to get it done. We have local contractors that are licensed timber operators that perform all of this felling work for us. And so, there are two sort of streams for funding for that. And some numbers there, we have removed, so this is since 2022, we've removed 70 black oaks from people's yards, essentially through the National Forest Foundation grant. And we've also removed 82 black oaks through the county grant. And a number of those county grant removals were actually at the county park, the campground up here, because when people move firewood, that's where we find the bugs. And so Riverside County was obviously very concerned as they have new campers come up every day. And so that is where a good number of those removals took place. Under either of those programs, we haul the wood off the contractor. It is covered. It is hauled off to a recycling facility that has the ability to do that less than 3-inch chipping. And then from there, the chips actually go to a biomass energy generator company. I'm sorry, I've totally lost the word for that, but you know what I mean. And then we debark the stumps. So you can see there a nice picture of contractor having done a really nice job of getting all of the bark off of what was left behind. So then really the key part of most of this is this last paragraph here on the right. So both the county park, where we surveyed 164 trees, and Camp Emerson, which is a Boy Scout camp, have an approximate 2.2 infestation rate. But then if we look at a large landscape, Idlewild Arts, Idlewild Arts, there is a less than 0.5%, a 0.4% infestation rate at Idlewild Arts. And we look at these sort of larger properties because the individual properties are voluntary, like I said. But what we're seeing then, or what these numbers show us, is that the bifenthrin spray treatment is working. Idlewild Arts has been sprayed before even our grant programs existed. And we are seeing that there is success in preventing the spread from getting any worse in areas that we have treated. County fire program has pretty much wrapped up. The program funded by the National Forest Foundation is wrapping up. And I am currently seeking funding to continue programs, GSOB programs, into the future. So that is what I have to say. I will put my slides up on our website at mcfsc.org. And other than that, anybody can call or ask questions in the chat. Happy to help. Thanks.
Callie,
Andy?
thank you. Really appreciate your sharing all that information and all the work you're doing on the ground in your community and involving the community. Julie, any questions for Callie? We have time for a couple, maybe.
Great, there's one. Thank you, Jan. Kelly,
Yes.
do you apply bifenthrin only in spring or twice a year as Ricardo specified?
We apply the bifenthrin once a year. As I said, our bug season is a little bit shorter due to our our weather. And so the bugs will leave and return sort of within a 6 months before the 6 months is up. So we are currently only spraying in the spring.
Thank you. That's all.
All right. Kelly, thank you again. Really appreciate you
Thank you,
sharing that
Jan.
information. We are going to get rolling here again, and thank you for everyone for coming back. We have a slight schedule change due to a schedule conflict. So we're jumping a little bit ahead, and Dr. Tom Scott is going to be presenting on kind of what he's been doing as far as research. He was originally part of our Looking Forward segment towards the end of the webinar, but yeah, we're going to have him chat right now. So
Great.
Go ahead, Tom.
Perfect. Thank you for your ability to adjust. I want to start by saying that 17 years ago, Jan Gonzalez put together a meeting on oak mortality in Julian. And in the middle of my talk, a man in the front row stood up. He's wearing a chalupa hat. He had a big beard. And he literally, with a lot of emotion, said, "It's the beetles. The beetles are killing our trees." And, you know, being wrapped up in science like we all do, I tended to approach this by saying, well, we really don't have a model for that, that most times it's that drought starts to put the trees in stress, and then beetles that wouldn't normally be so detrimental begin to have a very bad effect and all this. And well, if I could roll that tape back in my life and actually acknowledge the fact that this person actually knew what was going on ahead of the time that Tom Coleman actually found the beetles, I'd love to do it. But I say this because we've come a long way. I think our knowledge of GSOB and how to manage it have really improved, especially in this last period of maybe 10, 15 years. And so we have a good understanding of how GSOB spreads. We have a good understanding of the role of firewood. And in fact, when we had a large amount of money for outreach, we found out how impactful outreach can be in slowing these very large diasporas that take place. I think we've developed ways within woodlands to slow and minimize the damage that occurs. Some of these things involve using pesticides, but you know, as a wildlife biologist, that gives me a lot of stress. But at the same time, if the risk is losing specimen trees, losing trees that are sort of the linchpins of woodlands, this is something that we have to figure out. We've learned a lot about the life history of GSOB. And I think in a way that's allowed us to actually use these techniques for management. But most important, the GSOB actually goes past the bark twice in its life history, which means that's the opportunity where we're guaranteed to have the greatest effect and the greatest efficiency in controlling them. Inadvertently, at the same time, we've learned a lot about the demography of the red oaks of Southern California, and it's something that I think is going to be a contribution in a larger sense to just tree management in general. I think we've learned a lot about the distribution of the outbreaks within woodlands, because we have this notion that I'm happy that we're finally adopting the word from the epidemiological literature, which is amplifying individuals. And in our woodlands, we often have an amplifying individual with literally thousands of beetles. At the same time, all the trees in the surrounding area have very small populations, you know, handfuls, 5, 10, maybe 12 insects in the entire tree. So with that, we've really, I think we've kind of turned the corner in a number of ways. We still have a couple of challenges. I think one of the biggest ones is detection. GSOB isn't attracted, the adults are not attracted to any traps. So we end up finding outbreaks 2 to 3 years after they start to occur. That's when we first see it in aerial photo imagery, or we see it on the ground in surveys. But at that point, we're really now in a management situation and nowhere near in any kind of an eradication situation. And although we found ways to slow and minimize damage, it's still the case that if we could only find a way to detect the beetles sooner, it would be much better. That may be a holy grail and not one that we can ever hope to get a hold of. And one of the things that I've started to work on is another area where we have challenges is trying to figure out what trees are susceptible. In terms of IPM, if we didn't have to treat every tree in a woodland, if we knew that we had a fraction of the trees we could treat and still have the same effect in terms of damping down the population of GSOB, this would be a very good thing. So we know the host range of the species. We know that when drought increases, we have an increase in susceptibility of our trees, and we have an increase in decline and death of our oaks. We know that densities of oaks, dense oak woodlands as opposed to scattered trees, has a very large effect on contagion, which in turn, I guess you could sort of interpret as a kind of a change in susceptibility of the woodland in general. But again, this leads to more rapid death and decline in dense woodlands than in woodlands that are more open. So and finally, you know, this role of amplifiers, I think, is really important because it gives us a hand of not, again, being heavy-handed in our management of oak woodlands, but able to sort of look at those and locate those trees. Unfortunately, one of the things that happens is that you can have an amplifier tree without any exit holes. I'm going to say this again because it's really important for all of your managers to consider, is you can have trees. Now, sometimes they're identified because a black oak won't leaf out in the spring, where it literally has thousands of beetles inside it, but there's not a single exit hole yet. It's as if all the females decided that this was the place they were going to lay their eggs. So having 1 or 5 or 15 or any count that you can have in terms of exit holes can't identify that amplifying tree. So this is something that we're working on, but I'm not going to share any more information on that. But it's just important to recognize that exit holes show you what's happened in the past. They don't necessarily show you what's going on in the tree the year that you're going to apply your management activity. So finally, in terms of susceptibility, we've been trying to look at the role of hybrids, that is, trees that are a mixture of coast live oak and interior live oak, to see what kind of advantage they might yield to management and the fact that these trees seem to have resistance to GSOB. And just this week, I got the results from my colleagues who are doing I guess you'd call it, they're doing the bionumerology of the genomics of this problem. And one thing we can say is that we find that bark thickness and traits of Quercus wilsonii, the interior live oak, seem to give some kind of resistance to coast live oak when those genes are intermixed through hybridization. This is just very tentative work at the time. It's still fuzzy because these trees hybridize so often that the characters have become disassociated. So you can have trees that have coast live oak leaves, but have bark characteristics, which are a combination of the two species. So we're still trying to sort all these things out, but tentatively, I think there's some hope in that we may have another way to increase this IPM management of GSOB, because we may start to be able to identify trees that might be resistant to GSOB in the long run. And Pia, I'm sorry I didn't give you a call about this, but I just got this information today. So stay tuned. Hopefully we'll have more information. The mathematics of trying to solve admixtures of these trees is pretty daunting, and I expect that maybe takes 2 or 3 months for us to come up with answers. I'm not going to be able to take questions. I promised my son I would come to hear his seminar, and I'm going to take off right now to do that. But if you have questions from you can get a hold of Jan Gonzalez and she'll be able to forward them to me and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks again for your understanding, Jan, and I'm gonna sign off now. Thanks again, Isaac,
right.
as well.
Thank you, Tom. We appreciate you being here. And we'll be in touch.
Yeah, great.
Thank you for sharing.
Thanks again.
All righty, take care. Isaac, thank you for your flexibility. I'd like to go ahead and introduce Isaac Osman. He's a resource management coordinator with Irvine Ranch Conservancy. And he's going to give us another perspective and case study with the work that he's been involved with. So Isaac, please go ahead.
All right, thank you everyone. And thanks to UCANR for putting on the symposium. So like Jan said, I'm with the Irvine Ranch Conservancy, and I've been here as long as we've had our infestation, which was discovered in 2014. So I'm going to sort of talk about our experience over the last 10 years dealing with it. Let's see if I can advance. So one of the things I want to just kind of highlight from the very beginning that I think was key to our, I'll call it successful management. I think that's fair in some regards, but you know, from the very beginning, we relied on cooperative extension folks, Forest Service folks down in San Diego County who had been dealing with this problem for several years already. And, you know, this was a new issue for us. We didn't really know what to do, what our treatment options were. So we relied on these people, John Kabashima, Tom Scott, Bea, and others, Tom Coleman. And they, you know, they helped us, you know, they trained staff and volunteers to identify GSOB signs and symptoms, got us on a path of so we could survey on our own. And then the other sort of key piece is having funding to carry out your management activities. So that was obviously really critical. And thankfully the landowner, OC Parks, you know, funded some of this work in the first few years. And then we were fortunate enough to get some grant funding through CALFIRE and OCFA and the National Forest Foundation. And then recently we got another local assistance grant from CDFW to do some oak restoration too. And then, you know, we had these existing partnerships with, you know, OC Parks, they're the landowner, Orange County Fire Authority, but, you know, the GSOB provided this opportunity. You know, there's not a lot of opportunity for Sawyer training in Orange County. There's not a lot of trees you can just cut down. And so we needed trees to be removed. They needed to train their Sawyers. So that was a good partnership. Tom Scott, who just spoke, he used Weir Canyon to conduct a lot of his research in those first few years too. And then the GSOB task force that was started in San Diego County, they helped sort of get the word out about our infestation and connected us with other folks who were dealing with this problem. So that was really important. All right, so it all sort of begins in 2014. That's when GSOB was discovered in Upper Weir Canyon, and it was confirmed. This is a aerial imagery of Weir Canyon. You know, these red and yellow dots are infested trees. All the blue dots are trees that got looked at and have not been infested. And then this sort of blob-like polygon is our treatment polygon. And so there's a buffer, a treatment buffer that we put in place around any infested tree. So that's what this represents. This is just to kind of give you a sense of the scale of the infestation. We have the sort of ground zero point on Upper Weir Canyon and then some outlying infested trees. Another sort of important thing to mention, I think, I know a lot of folks already have spoken about, you know, working on private land, dealing with private landowners. That was not our situation. We're working in a wildland setting. This is part of OC Park's property. It's a wilderness area. There's very limited public access. And I think that ultimately benefited us because we were able to, try different management activities, carry out those activities without a lot of restrictions, basically. And on top of that, the landowner was very supportive of the things we were trying to do. So, like a lot of other folks have already, talked about, our approach initially is to remove amplifying trees. And so in the first couple years, we were fairly aggressive in removals, I would say. We were removing both moderate and highly infested trees. And then in year 3, we kind of scaled back and developed a new criteria. So we were removing anything that had more than 10 new exit holes that year. Because we're in a wildland setting, we would leave fully dead trees because they have ecological value in the oak woodlands. So we would leave those. They're not really a threat. I guess there's a fuels thing there, but we decided to leave them. And then obviously doing all the felling before nesting bird season and before beetle emergence, and then following all the standards that folks have already talked about. We did try some of these other treatments that folks have talked about already, the debarking, slabbing, tarping. These things work at very small scales, but like people have already mentioned, they're super time consuming, hard to scale up, require maintenance. So we didn't end up scaling up any of these other treatments. We did, for trees that were kind of far from a road, or that the loader or bobcat couldn't get to, we would have the crews fell the tree, and then we would treat the cut trunk with carbaryl. And so that was kind of an option for trees that were a little bit more remote. Here's a photo of a debarker, and you can see these GSOB, the pupil chambers here in the bark. But yeah, like I said, debarking is just not really an option at scale. Here's a blurry photo of a debarking operation. So chemical treatments. In the first couple years, we did systemic trunk injections of emamectin benzoate. We've done a few trunk injections in recent years for trees that are remote and hard to access, but this was not an approach that we decided to take. We were concerned about trees in a wildland setting, the uptake, especially during drought conditions. 2015 was that there was a period of time where we were in the middle of a drought, so that was a concern. And then, like Bea and others have mentioned, every time you inject a tree, you're creating this opening for new pathogens. And we actually did see some staining and weeping associated with those injection sites. And then, like Ricardo mentioned, it's really expensive. We did systemic basal trunk sprays with dinotefuran. Similarly, we were concerned about the uptake, and it was also fairly expensive. So the third treatment was carbaryl plus an acidifier, and the acidifier is really key with carbaryl. It helps the chemical last on the tree. But like Ricardo mentioned, there are these sort of downsides. It requires a restricted materials permit, notice of intent, and it's toxic to bees. But we decided to go with carbaryl, and that's the treatment we've been doing the last 8 or 9 years, actually. And we've seen evidence that the carbaryl is working. We've seen dead GSOB in exit holes, like as they're emerging, they're consuming the bark, and you can find them there. And so that was, for us, was like physical evidence that this is actually working. The other reason we decided to use it is because it was scalable. You know, we were treating around 150 acres of oak woodland, and that would take a crew of 2 guys about 2 to 3 weeks to complete, treating anywhere between 1,000 and 2,500 trees every year. I mean, you can imagine trying to trunk inject that many trees. It's just not an option. And because it was the least expensive option, it allowed us to treat adjacent trees that weren't infested. And so, like I mentioned earlier, we applied this treatment buffer. And in the last 2 years, we actually have reduced that buffer because we feel like the treatments have been working pretty well. Okay, let's see. Photo of carbaryl application here. I'll talk a little bit about monitoring. We're kind of doing the same things that a lot of folks are doing too, and you know, surveying after the flight period between October and April, looking at all infested trees, but also checking adjacent uninfested trees to see if there's spread happening. And then also trying to look outside of the known GSOB footprint in some of the adjacent canyon areas. So all the trees get a unique identifier tag, and they have all of this information associated with each tree. So this table is a summary of sort of the last 10 years of what we've been up to. You can see in this first column the total infested trees. The number grew in the first few years, but has sort of stabilized from year 5 until now. The infestation hasn't really grown in the last 5 years, and I think that's probably the result of our management activities. And then this next column is the trees that we removed. So in the first few years, we were removing between 20 and 30 trees a year. And then we weren't finding trees that met the criteria for removal around year 5. And so that number has dropped off. We haven't actually had to remove a tree in more than 4 or 5 years. So that's been great. And then this is just the number of trees that have been looked at, the total surveyed. So that includes uninfested and infested trees. And then this last column is just how many trees got treated each year. And you can see in the last 2 years, I mentioned we reduced that spray buffer. So that number dropped because we were just not treating as many trees. I included these 2 pie graphs. The one on the left is basically in the first couple of years of treatment, and then the one on the right is more recent. And the thing I just wanted to highlight here is just that the number of this gray portion of the pie chart indicates trees that had no new holes, and that has grown to 90%. So every year we've been surveying the last few years, 90% of the trees don't have any new exit holes. So to us, that's indicating that that things are going fairly well. Some of the challenges, these are things that folks have mentioned already, but you know, the GSOB footprint has expanded. We do have small infestations in some of the adjacent canyons to Weir. And as we know, some of the surrounding canyon communities outside of our managed area, including the Cleveland National Forest, has GSOB now. And then, like Tom was mentioning, you always feel like you're kind of one step behind with GSOB. By the time a tree is showing signs and symptoms, it's already been infested. And then, yeah, there's no quick way around surveying. It just takes time. You got to go look at a tree and count the holes. And then there are just some trees that are in places that are just too hard to get to for a variety of reasons. I did want to mention a few sort of positives that we've noticed, like someone mentioned earlier, a lot of the trees that we quote unquote removed or cut down have since resprouted, and actually the majority of them have. And so I always like telling people about that. I think it's an important thing to keep in mind. And a lot of these trees actually survived a fire after they had resprouted. So this photo here is of a tree that was cut down in 2015, I believe. And this photo is from a year ago, I think. So this tree resprouted, burned, and then kept going. Let's see if I can go back. Another sort of observation, I don't know if this is significant or not, but after the Canyon 2 fire, a lot of the oak bark surface got charred. It was sort of blackened. And we haven't seen new exit holes on that surface. So I don't know if, and there's a significant amount of that in the woodland, a lot of charred bark surface. So perhaps that's, an upside to the fire. Just thought it was worth mentioning. And then, we've done some oak restoration. We're seeing oaks filling in those gaps that were created by the removals. And then, the last thing is that, we've kept up the communication with cooperative extension folks, and we've gotten calls from folks that live in the canyon communities wanting to know what they can do now that they have GSOB. So these are all positive things. Here's just a photo of volunteers and staff planting acorns with tree tubes in Weir Canyon right after the fire. This was the same year. So I'm just going to end with this slide, which, I feel like we're kind of at a crossroads with our management activities. I think we know that the carbaryl has been effective. The level of infestation has definitely been reduced. But at the same time, I don't think treating with carbaryl indefinitely is a sustainable sort of option. Like I mentioned, we've reduced our spray buffer, but perhaps we could reduce it even more. I know other folks are using different insecticides. I'm also open to just pausing treatments altogether and just monitoring and seeing what happens. So I'd be curious to hear from other folks about their thoughts on this, given where we're at now. So with that, I'm just going to end it and answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Isaac. Appreciated you sharing that. I remember those early starts with the research in Weir Canyon. Julie, any questions for Isaac?
Thanks. We have a couple of questions, Isaac. What have you seen with resprouting trees that have been infested? Any viability there?
Sorry, could you rephrase that or say that again?
Well, the question's about the viability of resprouting trees.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like they're on a good path. You mean just like this, if they'll survive from resprouting, if that's the question?
I don't have any more specifics than that.
Okay, yeah, I mean,
so Isaac, I think the question relates to, you've got an oak tree, it's resprouting from the base where the trunk was cut off, and you've got multiple sprouts coming up from that trunk. So is that really viable?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've wondered this myself, like, what is this tree going to look like in 20 years? It's going to look pretty funky. So I don't know. It's a good question. Maybe folks who have seen this more, maybe CALFIRE or something could comment, but yeah, I don't know. But one thing I'll say about the resprouting, we were initially we were cutting off all the bark on those stumps, and I think in hindsight we kind of stopped doing that, and we would end up just treating the remaining bark on a stump. And I think that was probably a better option because you're leaving some living tissue above ground for resprouting to happen. That would be one perhaps recommendation rather than cutting off all the bark if you can't. If you can't treat, then I guess that, you know, cutting off all the bark makes sense. But just a note there.
We have an addition to that additional response from somebody who's been dealing with GSOB who reminds us that the sprouts are smaller diameter and they just don't oh, this is from a fire, yeah, and as well. And so it's a multi-stem trunk now, but the smaller diameters don't tend to be as susceptible.
That makes
So,
sense.
and then we just, the only other question, Isaac, is about your table.
Yeah.
And the question is, the number of treated trees seems to be larger than the total number of trees surveyed. So is that because of multiple treatments?
Yeah, so we were so every tree that got treated was not also surveyed, if that makes sense. There's just so many oaks in the oak woodland. We were treating trees whether they had been surveyed or not, if that makes sense. So yeah, that number, the total treated, is going to be higher because we were just treating everything in the woodland. We haven't surveyed every tree in the woodland, but the vast majority we have, but there's some that we haven't.
I see a hand up. If you could please put your comment or question in the Q&A or chat as appropriate, that would be good. We have a lot of attendees here. We have almost 200 and it's hard to unmute people. Thank you.
Isaac, thank you again for being with us today and for sharing. Thank you again for being flexible with the presentation schedule change.
No problem.
Julie, thanks for your help again with the questions. We will go ahead and move on to our next segment, where we're talking about, what's our hope for the future? What is the latest research? What are we interested in looking into? Any new technologies, any new strategies? And Beth Kyer with the Forest Service is going to rejoin us. Are you ready? We've kind of switched the schedule around on you, Beth. I don't know if you're able to go now.
Yeah, I'm ready. I've been following along with the schedule.
Okay, great.
So
Thank you.
I've adapted.
All right. Appreciate everyone's flexibility. It's rare that we're early. Okay, please go ahead. Share.
Okay. Get everything ready. Okay. So yeah, so as Jan said, I'm going to be talking about the Forest Service and the role it has played with the history of GSOB. I do want to lead with the fact that I do not work for any forest in specific, so I cannot answer questions about specific forests. My job and my role is to support forests in their pest management. So think of me as like a general person. So throughout the years, the Forest Service has played an integral role in collaboration with our partners. So we work very closely with CALFIRE, we work very closely with UC, and others are very appreciative of these partnerships. But we've played a large role in understanding and managing gold-spotted oak borer at the landscape level. And oaks mean a great deal to us. And part of the reason for that is because the 4 forests that make up the Southern California zone or province are the Angeles, the Cleveland, the Los Padres, and the San Bernardino National Forests. Now, combined, those 4 forests manage over 750,000 acres, not of forest land, not of oak land, but specifically over 750,000 acres of just California black oak and coast live oak, the 2 species that have demonstrated to be the most susceptible and the most impacted by gold-spotted oak borer. And besides that, oaks are a large and very important part of our forests and cultures here in Southern California. And for that reason, we do put a significant amount of effort into their management. So in the beginning, we've gotten several talks about where we started with gold-spotted oak borer, and I'm going to touch on that one more time. But we noticed that oaks were dying en masse in San Diego County, and it was in part the Forest Service entomologist Tom Coleman, along with Stacy Hishinuma and UC, that discovered what the cause of that mortality was. It was linked to this beetle we knew was here, but we didn't realize was causing this mass mortality. And so enter the gold-spotted oak borer. Now, when that happened, a lot of the research that everybody was doing was aimed to answer very specific questions. What is the life cycle of this insect? How does it operate? How does it kill the tree? What is it going to do to our forests and our oak stands? We had to develop strategies and figure out what tools we had, what tools we knew of, what tools we needed to create in order to manage it. Some of the things on this list that we still do: we still monitor and survey for GSOB. We still assess the impacts of GSOB on our forests, and that will always be ongoing and work that is never done. And most importantly, we still work to develop new tools and strategies to augment our current IPMs. Insecticides have their place, and they are an important tool, but we cannot treat an increasing number of trees every year for the rest of time. So the future of our management will need to include more sustainable practices, and we understand that. So moving forward, some of the stuff that we are looking at in our long-term studies and current strategies is to understand the impacts. We also want to look into best practices for restoration to maintain oak stands and understand what allows some trees to die while others survive. And lastly, and probably most importantly, the addition of traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK, as you might have heard it referred to. It's very important in creating a more sustainable approach, because these forests were managed long before we got here and long before there was a Forest Service or CALFIRE or UC, and we have a lot to learn from that. So long-term studies, we know that insecticides protect trees in the moment today from infestation, but we are lacking long-term studies looking at the impacts of annual pesticide use on tree survival. So comparing stands that have been treated in infested zones to stands that have not been treated in infested zones to see how many of those trees die. Do any of those trees survive? So what are the impacts on mortality? What happens if we don't treat? Can we say for sure that a certain percentage of trees will die if we treat or we don't treat? We also want to understand the impacts of things like arthropods and acorns. What are the long-term management or long-term impacts of applying chemicals to these trees year after year? So we are looking and currently compiling data to begin piecing these together. Well, part of the reason these studies haven't been done yet is because we needed the time and we needed the years of data to really look at this over long term. So with this, hopefully we plan to be informed as possible about the effects of long-term pesticide application and use that to guide us and really use our best judgment for its application. We are also concerned about restoration. So understanding the best propagation practices and restoration practices is important to our future management strategy, largely because GSOB is here to stay. We're not going to get rid of it. It will not be eradicated. It will become part of our landscape. And that is something we're going to have to learn to live with. So whether we are returning oaks to areas where we have lost them, or we are trying to maintain oaks on a landscape by ensuring that we have varied age stands to maintain the presence of oaks. So as the larger trees die, you have a smaller diameter cohort behind them to take their place, and then a smaller diameter cohort behind them. So we've always got the presence of unsusceptible oaks in a stand on a landscape. That's very important to us. And we also want to understand why some trees die and others remain untouched. We're starting to figure out, especially UC, why certain species are susceptible and certain species are not. But I'm curious about species or trees within the same species. So we believe that we have identified some oaks that by all accounts should be infested and dead. They're the right size, they are the right species, and they are in close proximity to amplifier trees and pretty extensive infestations. And yet they are alive and they have either very few exit holes or no exit holes. And it's important to also say these trees have not been treated. Now, one of the trees is actually the tree in the background of this photo. It's in the middle of a Frisbee golf course and it's been hit with Frisbees. People have driven nails into it, but there it is. It stands, it's still there. There are dead trees around it. But what is it about this tree, that makes it survive? Is it the chemicals inside? Is it its own defenses? Is it environmental? We don't know, but we hope to find out, and that will help us guide future management and create tools that can help with that. So lastly would be our integration of that TEK, and most specifically fire. Well, fire has been used traditionally to manage for insects in oak habitats. For example, smoke production from cultural burns has proven to be effective management for acorn pests. And we also know that maintaining fire in a landscape allows oaks to be dominant trees. So as succession goes, oaks are pushed out by pines, which are then pushed out by fir. But regularly returning to fire to the landscape does maintain that. It removes smaller trees that are going to grow and outcompete with oaks, because oaks were designed, have evolved to be dominant trees. They need a full crown, they need full sun, and they need that space. They need that water to really be strong and healthy and resilient. And we could do that by returning fire to a landscape. I'm also specifically curious about how fire can prevent egg laying by GSOB. So when bark is burned, it changes chemically and it also changes physically. It becomes abrasive. So maybe GSOB will find trees that have been burned to be less, they're not going to want to lay their eggs there. Sorry, I got all flustered when my slides got all messed up. Less attractive to females for laying eggs. So could charred bark be a management option? We could, as Jolene has explained, what if we could use pile burning or other means to char bark of high value trees? I don't know if it will work, but there's potential, and that could be an option. Now, I do want to stress the most important part of marrying Western science with indigenous science is not just learning about traditional ecological knowledge, not just learning those tools and those skills and applying them, but doing it together jointly with tribes and becoming co-stewards of management and working together to implement cultural burns and implement things like that. And that's kind of where we're focusing right now. That's what we're working on. And in the future that might change. There might be new tools to augment our toolbox. But I think we're making a pretty good start to becoming more sustainable in our management. So, questions?
Thank you, Beth. That's really great to see kind of the questions and what is going to be looked at here hopefully as we go forward. Julie, any questions for Beth?
Beth, there's a request for your contact information. If you could if you're comfortable posting it in the chat, please.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I will post that in the chat.
And another question about burning at scale, controlled burns, prescribed burns, cultural burns at a scale level.
That's complicated. As you know, today the Forest Service likes to do these big, giant, really robust burns. You know, we want to burn 2,000 acres, and that is opposite from cultural burning, which is largely smaller. It's in more of a mosaic pattern, and to burn trees correctly, or I should say to not burn trees correctly, to do these cultural burns while maintaining tree health and not adding to mortality from burns that get away or just too intense, we would want to focus on burning at a smaller scale and maybe trying to implement more of that mosaic pattern. But I'm just an entomologist, so.
There's a related question about burning around individual trees.
Yeah, so that is kind of when it comes to charring the bark and looking at preventative measures. That's where we're starting, building small piles around individual trees to create a really exact area of burn so that we can see specifically how it goes. If that answers the question. But yeah, that is what we're doing right now.
Thank you. We have one remaining question for now, but it has to do with managing a sprouting tree, managing the sprouts of a tree. Do you want to take that, Beth, or should we, if we have time, we field it to one of our other experts?
I can take it, and if anybody wants to add, they can add in onto it. So the resprouts, we kind of touched on this earlier when we were answering questions before my presentation. But resprouts can be really healthy. If you go through the forest and you look around, you will find forests that are completely resprouted from stumps. And those trees are healthy and they're vital, and they will remain GSOB free until they grow to a susceptible size. At which chance they will become susceptible and might get GSOB. If the question is how to maintain those stumps, because when they resprout, it's like a bush. I have suggested, and anybody else can add to this, watch and maybe see for those dominant leaders. You don't really want a bush, you want a tree. So as it grows and increases in diameter, you choose which of those leaders you want to be more dominant. And those, so they won't be outcompeted by the other 50 resprouts that are also on that stump. That is what I would suggest.
You hit the question on the nail. That's it for questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Beth. Really appreciate that. Thank you, Julie, for fielding the questions. Randall, did you have anything else you wanted to add? I saw you.
No, I was just going to say that I had passed that question on to Chris McDonald in the chat.
Okay.
He's got some expertise in that area.
Okay. Great. Thank you. All right. Well, unbelievable. We're running ahead of schedule now. That's rare. So next up, we have Kevin Soland. He is with KRS Environmental Consulting. I want to send a special thank you out to Kevin because he was a very last minute add-in to our schedule because we had a cancellation. So I think he's got some great information to share. We appreciate him joining us today. And Kevin, you can add to your introduction if you would like and take it from here. Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah. Thank you, Jan. Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today. Hello, everyone. Yep, I'm Kevin Soland. Although I am not NASA and probably going to be showing you some cool stuff they're doing with forest monitoring using their satellites. I am going to show you some really cool stuff that we're using to monitor forest health at the Girl Scout camp in Julian, right in central San Diego County. Yeah, so like I was saying, we're not not using satellite imagery, but we're using drone imagery to look at like leaf level changes in tree chlorophyll and water content across time. Today, we'll be using the Girl Scout camp at Camp Wanaka near Julian as our case study, because they have a huge GSOB issue, and they're doing quite a bit to help, to mitigate that issue. So, and like Jan said, yeah, I just stepped in last minute, but put together a really good presentation this morning. I know sometimes when we're under pressure, we do our best work. So happy to be sharing this with you today. So just quickly for some context, let's see, screen to share. Now I need to share that. Okay. Okay, hopefully everyone can see the Google map of where Girl Scout Camp Wanaka is. So that's just for context, as we kind of know, GSOB's range, that's where we're going to be investigating today. So now let me go over and share the slideshow. The Girl Scouts, have been actively managing for GSOB for several years. They're doing, a series of forest health treatments through thinning and understory brush removal. But to, deal with that, biomass bottleneck, they recently purchased 2 air curtain burners. They have quite an operation going on out there to mitigate, to get rid of that infested wood. So what I'm doing, to assist them with that is I'm monitoring, like I was saying, using a multispectral camera to monitor changes, at the leaf level across time and in response to treatment. So to do that, using a pretty large drone that actually is used by NASA. It's also approved by the Department of Defense. I think I need to move this to the other screen. Yeah. So I'm doing this with the Girl Scout camp, a couple of tribes here in San Diego County, as well as up in Lake County, up in Northern California as well. So this drone is, like I said, it's equipped with a multispectral camera. So it's got red, green, and blue sensors on it. So it produces, the same, the natural color imagery that we see in pictures day to day. So just I wanted to give you a little bit of a background before I started showing the imagery, because sometimes people get a little overwhelmed at what they're looking at. So, our eyes are equipped with 3 sensors, red, green, and blue. That's why we see, a mixture of those colors is what we see and interpret as the natural world. But a plant, however, leaves, they primarily take the blue and that red light and they absorb it to do photosynthesis, whereas green light is a waste product. It's reflected out. And you can see that green wave that's, spanning horizontally across the screen. That's chlorophyll content, or just chlorophyll reflectance, sorry, is what I should say. And so you can see that bump under the green box, and that's, that green light being a waste product is reflected back into our eyes. And that's why we see, leaves traditionally as being green. However, that really doesn't tell us anything about tree health. Is there are other bands of light that exist that are invisible to us, such as near infrared and red edge, that reflect chlorophyll much stronger than green light does. So just subtle changes in those bands of light allow us to see changes in health much more clearly than just using red, green, and blue imagery. So this camera produces, like I said, pretty high resolution for a multispectral camera. Zooming out, when we look at that as across 600 acres, that's some pretty high level detail. And so, like I said, this is about a 600 acre sample, that we map regularly. You can see on the left side of the screen quite a bit of brown where there's been thinning and understory brush removal, as opposed to the right side of the screen where obviously a lot more vegetation and whatnot, where work needs to be done. So again, this is just a good representation of the natural colors that we see. But again, this camera is equipped with near infrared and red edge. So using different combinations of those lights, we can produce what's like right here is called a false color composite. And then so when we zoom out and look at this, we can get an idea, looking at where red is reflected strongly, much brighter. It's going to be much higher vitality and plant health, whereas darker areas are going to show areas where it's less healthy, I should say. And so that's one tool. I kind of look at, my drone as a tool, not as a drone or anything else, but just a tool that we use to monitor these changes. And so likewise, we can use like a near infrared composite, same thing, just a different way of looking at the landscape and what's going on out there. So then to zoom in a little bit, we're going to zoom in right there. So this is a section of the Girl Scout camp that's used quite frequently by I think it's the Welcome Center. So this is just a the RGB composite, showing what's going on out there. So from the aerial view here, we can see obviously there's some mortality in the upper canopy, possibly some early stages of thinning there. And again, this is I just like threw this together this morning, so just kind of glancing through it and honed in on this one particular area where I knew they have a lot of GSOB. But anyway, we turn on the false color composite, and all of a sudden, that variation becomes much stronger. So as we can see, like in the lower left screen, where it's much brighter and denser, versus if you look on the right side of the screen along the road, the trees appear to be less healthy than you may have thought when you were looking up here. And so likewise, turn on the near infrared composite as well. Again, just another way of looking at what's going on out there. And again, both these tools provide much higher detail than just an RGB composite would. And so then looking at, this is Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, or NDVI. And this is a pretty common way of measuring plant health, biomass, and in density across a landscape. And again, just looking at those red circles are from the original RGB imagery. But again, when you look at the landscape, through the lens of near infrared and red edge and whatnot, you can start to see, what's essentially invisible to us, the unseen. So likewise with NDWI, so this is Normalized Difference Water Index. So we're looking at canopy water content, and again, looking at changes, in water content across time and in response to treatment is something that I've been really, really interested in, and that we're actively doing. And so, imagery is one thing, but extracting data from the imagery, it is what we're all ultimately after. And so by using the values from those vegetation indices, so I should clarify, this is pre and post burn. This was not done at the Girl Scout camp. This is from another project we did over the summer. So analyzing before and after a cultural burn. So again, when you can provide these type of data to your funder, or when you're trying to do, some type of analysis to really look at changes across time, it's great that we're able to produce, some pretty high quality quantifiable data to do that. And then, other fun stuff we can do, like segmentation, and, go from there. I wish I had a bit more prepared for you all today, but that's really all I had, put together. Is I'm working with La Jolla Jolene. I believe she's on this call. I heard you talking about her just a few minutes ago, but we're doing these sort of case studies, not only at the Girl Scout camp, but at La Jolla as well. And then hopefully we'll be ballooning that out even more, just so we can start to monitor these changes across time, and hopefully hone in on, being able to ultimately discern between a tree that's, being, affected by GSOB as opposed to some other stressor like drought, because it's pretty difficult to tell, between the signature of a tree, when thinning, whether it's affected by drought or some other, pest. But by doing these, case studies across time, we can, start to hopefully answer some of those questions.
Great, interesting. Thank you, Kevin. Again, we appreciate you jumping on board very last minute. Any questions, Julie, for Kevin?
No questions, but since Kevin, and thank you, Kevin, since he mentioned Jolene, Jolene, do you have anything to add about the project at La Jolla?
Just that we're really looking forward to doing the survey a year after and 2 years after to see how long that recovery rate takes for the burn, because fire is hot and it does damage trees. So a lot of trees were scorched, but they're not dead. They're showing photosynthetic activity, and they're going to make that recovery. But to see how long that occurs will be interesting. Addressing a comment earlier about burning individual trees, there's only so much heat a tree can take. If it's infested with GSOB extensively, it's probably not going to live anyway, so I wouldn't worry about it. But if it's like a healthy tree, you would want to do a ring fire to reduce the heat on that specific tree. But again, to figure out how big your rings need to be and what the fuel loading of the specific trees are, that's really going to make an impact on these surveys and analysis of that burn. There's just so many variables, but this is a start. So we're really looking forward to working with Kevin, and SDSU is paying for that research. So hopefully we'll know more in the future.
Great. Thank you, Jolene.
We did have a couple of questions come in.
Okay.
I think somebody was asking for your contact information. It looks like somebody else gave it, Kevin. The one remaining question is, can you provide interpretation for data after a cultural burn? And what did you learn from that data?
Yeah, that's, largely what, we're working on, with Jolene. It is, interpreting that data. As far as what we learned specifically, and Jolene, might know better than I would, but it may have appeared, it was a little hot because the trees definitely were in shock, at the time we did the first post survey, which I think was just a few months after. But, through the imagery, it showed some signs of life, anyway. So I think that's what Jolene was hitting on, was the 1 and 2 year post recovery analysis, and then, help adjust, to the future burn, likely less hotter, but, other instances you may want to burn hotter.
And it's really tough too. This specific plot, it hasn't burned in over 100 years. So we have a lot of fuel, the duff layer is very thick. The fire burned at least 12 inches of duff in some areas. You can tell by the yucca sprouts, they're just kind of sticking out of the ground. So depending on how the methodology of reintroducing fire to the landscape, from which it's either been hit hard by fire or hasn't been hit by fire at all, there's going to be a huge variable, and it's just going to take a lot of time for us to figure out the system that was constantly practiced by the native people in California.
Do you know the number? This is one last question. Do you know the number of trees that have been burned at the La Jolla Reservation?
Specifically for oak trees, we were just approved by the BIA to conduct this burn, so only 7 trees were burned. Hopefully, as time goes on, we can burn more and more, but this is just still in the early preliminary stages. The permitting process for conducting prescribed and cultural fires is astronomically complex, and it just takes time.
Great. Thank you, Jolene. Julie, it looks like, did we get all the questions then?
Yes.
And I posted a reply to Rosie. I apologize. I had a typo there. Not Ross, Rosie. But okay. I want to thank all of the presenters for being here today. I shared a lot of great information in a really short amount of time, great overviews and great outlooks and updates. I also really want to thank everyone who participated today and engaged. We had a lot of great engagement in the chat and in the Q&A. I encourage you to scroll through both of those before you sign off today.
Jan,
because
do
a
they
lot
have
of
to take
good
a
sharing
test?
of information. Pardon me?
Is there a test that people need to take?
Yes, I'm getting to it.
Okay.
Um, not signing up yet. Anyway, I do want to encourage everyone, especially with all of the engagement that there was in the chat. There's been a lot of information sharing with, how other organizations, how other communities have been practicing management of gold-spotted oak borer. Also, there's some invitations and some sharing of additional information in there. So please take a look at that. You'll find several posts with an invitation and big request to take this evaluation feedback survey link that truly is important to us. So we appreciate your any and all feedback. And there will be a quiz for anyone interested in continuing education units. And Maria will put that up shortly while I give a little update on resources and how you might find information. And like I said at the beginning of the webinar, we are in the process of getting final word on the ISA continuing education units. So please go ahead and take the quiz. We'll have a follow-up email that will have all that information to you. Okay, so if there are any other questions for me, you can put them in the Q&A, and then I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now and just run you through a few things that resources. So I'm not finding where I can share my screen. Maria, can you help me, please?
Yes.
Let me try under.
It should be, it's
Oh,
a
there we go.
green
Found
button,
it.
yeah.
Yep, it was hidden. Sorry about that. Okay, so as I mentioned at the beginning, I've been involved with the Gold-Spotted Oak Borer education and outreach effort since 2009. And from the very beginning, like Beth and others have mentioned, it's been a joint collaborative project. The website gsob.org is kind of the central hub for education outreach information. The organizations listed here are just a few of the original coordinating work group organizations. There's certainly several others now throughout Southern California that have joined in on this. But I did want to point you out point you back to this website and reiterate. I know Bea mentioned the invitation to join the email list, subscribing to that listserv. I would like to reiterate that invitation. We've got a lot of resources and activities happening, including a GSOB survey and monitoring blitz in the spring. We'd like to keep you informed of the new resources and events and activities and trainings as they become available. And if you are on that email list, then we can keep you updated. Also, quick links are here. I invite you to come back to this website frequently because items will get shifted around occasionally, but the quick links will get you to that report of suspected GSOB symptoms that Bea had mentioned too. Other quick links like to the California Firewood Task Force and Firewood management information. There will be information under, gotta get this out of the way. Under what you can do, trainings and workshops, we will have links and information about today's symposium. As I said, we have recorded today's symposium. It will be several weeks before we get that fully processed and the closed captioning done and it uploaded, but it will be uploaded to the website, and we will let all of those who participated in today's event know about it, as well as any other follow-up information. So expect an email about the ISA CEUs, about today's resources. Let me see what else I wanted to share. Oh, the resources. A lot of the education outreach handout materials can be found under publications and links. Oops. Just click on that. And that's just organized by those that were done, created and developed in that joint work group level, and then existing GSOB information from the federal and state levels. The other page, as far as resources goes, that I think is really important is the oak tree management and pest resources. Those are just general resources for general oak tree management, because sometimes there are questions about that, but lots of really good resources here, and we keep this page updated as much as possible. Let me try to think if there's anything else. We are in the process of updating this website with more information or clarifying some information. And I know overall, just to let you know, the look may be changing in the next couple of months, because the UC Agriculture and Natural Resources is updating their content management, their online content management system overall. So we're not quite sure how that might change the look of things, but we invite you to come back to the website frequently. I invite you to contact me. I'll put my email in the chat, but you know, if you are interested in receiving some of these ID cards, if you work with a crew and you have a crew of folks that are going to be on the ground doing heavy duty surveying and monitoring, we have thick versions of these cards, really sturdy if they're going to be under heavy use. We also have thinner versions of these cards that are great for general education and outreach, getting community and neighbors and kids involved. So just let me know if you're interested in those. We also have, besides some, you know, firewood management, fact sheets and pamphlets, overall Goldspotted Oak Borer management handout materials. We also have a very limited amount of these door hangers involved. So if you're in an area that you're interested in maybe reaching out to a small community and are interested in these door hangers, they're bilingual, English on one side, Spanish on the other. You can also contact me. That's all I have for now. Let me stop sharing. Julie, any other questions that have come in?
Yes, there are a couple. Can dogs be trained for GSOB?
That I don't know. Is there anyone on?
Some dogs could be trained to sniff out cancer. I'm assuming dogs could be trained to do almost anything, but I've never been able to train a dog to do anything other than sit. So if you have a determined person with the resources, probably.
Hi, this is Beth. Dogs have been used for ambrosia beetles because the fungus that they vector, the yeast, they have a certain smell that dogs can really pick up on. So they have been used for things like rapido death and the red bay ambrosia beetle and laurel wilt in southeastern United States. We would have to figure out, I believe, that if there was a fungal associate with GSOB, if the dogs would be able to single out that unique associate, and that's why they're able to detect ambrosia beetles, because that fungus is only carried by those beetles. So that's, I believe, what it would take.
This is Kim as well. Dogs have been used to detect sudden oak death by Tathra remorum, because they have that fungal smell that have been trained. So it could be possible. It's a good idea.
But I don't think we know of anyone working on that type of research or training, right? Safe to say that, yeah. Jan, there's a request for somebody who wants to sign up for the San Diego focused group.
Let me see. I'm not sure what they mean. We do have, I guess I didn't mention, we do have a emerging tree pests education and outreach working group. I'm not sure if that's what they're indicating. If you would send me an email, That would be good. Oh, I see here in the chat, email Stan directly to sign up for a San Diego group. You know, we used to have a San Diego steering committee. I don't know if that's still active now. And that consisted when we started Goldspotted Oak Borer, because there was so much unknown and so much work to be done. That consisted of the top directors and managers of the land managers in the area. Because decisions had to be made. So we needed the decision makers there. So that's what that working group was. I'm not sure, but please feel free to email me. After today, I will be out of the area and not available for email directly until next month. But if you email me right away, I can get back to you, and we'll be in touch soon with a follow-up email to everybody regarding the resources and information from today. Anything else, Julie? There's a few more questions, I think. Let me see.
One's a comment, there's another question in, about, tribal members being part of this discussion, on the
Emily.
advisory group, and I'm not sure which advisory group this means. Jolene, do
Yeah.
you know, perhaps?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe the tree pest outreach committee or maybe the listserv. So I just recommended that they sign up for the listserv. That way they get all the notifications about everything that we're talking about, and then
Right.
find a way to be active in the community in that way. But
Right. And Emily, I can get in touch with you too. I'll follow up with you offline. Again, I want to thank everybody for being here and engaging. Chris, thank you for your help with the chat and answering for some. Thank you, Julie, Maria, and Randall. Thank you again for all your help. I'm going to sign off now. Goodbye, everybody.